Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So, before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. Back in 2006, I worked at a garage, or as some might call it, a filling station. It was owned by a well-known family in my village, the O'Reillys, and the place had been around since before World War II. The family was really kind, and the garage had been passed down through the generations. The building was basically a large house with a grocery shop set up in the big living room, and petrol pumps outside. I was just 17 when I started, so the only thing I really cared about at the time was what alcohol I could buy with the money I made to drink down by the lake with my friends. Honestly, it was one of the best times of my teenage years. About 3 weeks after I started, the O'Reillys made the decision to sell the garage. They wanted to use the money for IVF treatment, but sadly, it didn't work out for them. The other women I worked with often talked about the place being haunted. They always said it was Mrs. O'Reilly's ghost, and that her presence could be felt, especially in the storeroom. They told me to keep an eye out for things being moved around or for hearing her voice, but I was never really bothered. I just wanted to get through the day. There was one thing, though, that happened every morning. One of us would always find a pan of bread sitting right in the middle of the floor. They'd say it was Mrs. O'Reilly's doing, but I just went along with it and didn't think too much about it until one Sunday morning. It was just me and Terry, who was about 51 at the time, chatting behind the tills. The shop was quiet, as usual, on a Sunday morning. Our conversation had come to an end, and we were both staring ahead, when suddenly, bang, 2 bags of sugar flew about 7 feet away from their stand. My mouth almost dropped to the floor. I've always been on the fence about ghosts, but there was no explanation for what just happened. There was no breeze, no reason for the bags to move like that. And definitely no mice, or I wouldn't have been able to work there. Terry and I just stood there, completely frozen, staring at the bags. It felt like we were stuck in time for what seemed like an hour. Finally, Terry broke the silence. "I'm not picking them up," he said. So we just left them there for about 20 minutes before I finally went over and cleaned up the mess. After the O'Reillys sold the place, the new owners began renovating. They turned the entire shop into the small living room of the house, closed off the main entrance, and created a new side door. They were trying to make everything fit into 600 square feet of space, which used to be a 1,200 square foot shop. It looked messy no matter how much cleaning or organizing we did. We all hated the way it looked. And the new owner? He was extremely rude and difficult to work with. One Friday afternoon, the shop was packed with customers. 3 people were in line, and it felt crowded. The third woman in the queue, after paying for her items, mentioned something strange. She said she had picked up a pan of bread from the carpeted floor and placed it back on the shelf. But just after, she felt someone grab her wrist tightly and whisper in her ear, "I don't like Michael or what he's doing to my house," and no one was near her. We told the O'Reillys about this the next time they came in. They explained that Mrs. O'Reilly had passed away years ago, sitting in her chair in the living room, and that the room had never been touched until the renovations began. They told us that all the bedrooms had been turned into offices and storage rooms, and something strange always happened with the light in the hallway. No matter how many times we checked the wiring or switches, the light stayed on, all the time. We needed it on to see when we went upstairs to restock, but it never went out. The hallway light was the only part of the house that stayed the same. Maybe Mrs. O'Reilly was just trying to find her way around in the new place. I hope she's come to terms with the changes and found peace with the new owners, and that, somehow, she's okay with what happened to her beautiful house. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way.
I was a young girl, around 10 or 12, and I never believed in ghosts or anything paranormal until one night. I had fallen asleep in my room, but woke up sometime between 3 and 4 a.m., as I often did. The room was pitch dark, but this wasn't a shadow or a dream. I knew something was there. When I opened my eyes, I saw a figure, not just a person, but a ghost. The ghost was white and transparent, and I could see through him to the dresser on the other side. He looked like an old man, his features clearly visible, his hair, facial hair, glasses, even his eyes and ears. He wore a button-down shirt, and his legs and arms were blurry towards the bottom. I froze in fear. Was this really a ghost? My heart raced, and I quickly pulled the blankets over my head, pinching myself, trying to wake up, hoping it would all disappear. But when I peeked out, he was still there. I pinched myself again, but it only hurt more. Suddenly, the ghost vanished, only to reappear right next to my bed, beside my head. He didn't look at me, though, just stared at the walls. I was terrified. When he vanished again, I made a decision. I couldn't just stay there, frozen in fear all night. I told myself that if it wasn't real, it couldn't hurt me. So, I planned to count to 3 and then run to my parents' room. I whispered to myself, 1, 2, 3, and sprinted out of bed. As I dashed by the ghost, I saw it turn its head and look directly at me. That made me run even faster, glancing behind me to make sure it wasn't following. My heart raced as I reached my parents' room and jumped into their bed, gasping for breath. My dad didn't wake up, but my mom did. "Are you okay?" she asked. I just nodded, burying myself under the covers, not wanting to talk about it. I wanted to forget what happened. In the morning, I woke up in my parents' bed and went back to my room. The ghost was gone. I never saw it again. I tried telling my family about it, but they didn't believe me. They thought it was just a bad dream or my imagination. Looking back, I realize I should have asked my mom to check my room. Maybe nothing would have been there, or it would have vanished, but at least she would have seen it too. Still, I can now say I believe in ghosts. I'll never know why it appeared that night, but maybe if I wasn't so scared, I could have tried talking to it. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.
It all started in June 2010, about a month after I moved in. One evening, I called my boyfriend, Liam, and asked him to come home quickly because I thought there was a mouse or a rat in the kitchen. I had heard the sound of a bin bag rattling by the back door. So, I quickly shut the 2 doors leading into the kitchen, hoping to trap whatever was making the noise. It took Liam about 10 minutes to get home. When he got to the kitchen, the bin bag was sitting untouched, but all the bottom cupboard doors were wide open. There was no mouse in sight. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I can't help but feel something was off. In August 2010, around 3:30 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of running footsteps in the attic. The steps were quick and light, almost like a small child running back and forth. My son, who was 2.5 at the time, sleeps between me and Liam every night, so I'm a very light sleeper. I tried waking Liam, but he didn't wake up, so I just lay there, listening. The footsteps stopped after a few minutes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then, in September 2010, the next strange thing happened. Again, it was around 3 o'clock or 3:30 in the morning. This time, I woke up to loud scratching noises on my bedroom wall, under the window. The sound moved from one end of the wall to the other. It lasted about 2 minutes. Liam woke up, but the next morning, when I asked him about it, he had no memory of hearing anything. He didn't remember waking up at all. I started to wonder if I was imagining things, but it felt so real. In February 2011, I went to see a psychic. She was able to tell me a lot of things about my past that were shockingly accurate, but I'm skeptical about these things. She told me I should leave the house because there was something wrong with it. She also said my son could see spirits, but that they meant him no harm. She kept mentioning something about problems with the water in the house, but I thought everything was fine with the plumbing. Then, just 2 weeks later, around 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to the sound of rushing water. I woke Liam up, thinking there was flooding in the house next door. We could hear footsteps splashing through water, but when we followed the sound, we realized it was coming from our own attic. Liam went up with a flashlight to check. When he got to the attic, everything was quiet. The water tank was full, but it wasn't overflowing. There was no water on the floor, and everything was calm. We even went outside to see if anyone was awake next door, but no one had their lights on. After all of this, I found out that some bad things had happened to the previous families who lived here, especially their children. Just a month before the flooding incident, my son was really sick with meningitis and septicemia. We had only been back home for a few days when it happened. I don't know if it's just coincidence, but it makes me wonder if there's something more to this house. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My parents lived in an apartment for a year before I was born, and nothing unusual happened at first. But the strange stuff started the night my mom went into labor with me. She remembers hearing noises that sounded like a bowling ball rolling across the roof, from left to right, for hours. We lived on the top floor, so there was no attic, just the roof. After I was born, weird things kept happening. Books would disappear, cupboard doors would open on their own, and we'd hear footsteps. One night, I was in my pram, and my mom heard a musical hairbrush playing by itself. She went to pick it up, only to find it standing perfectly still. When my dad tried to make the same sound, he had to shake it pretty hard. When I was about 5 or 6 months old, my mom found me crawling down the stairs. Somehow, the base of my cot had collapsed, and I slid right through it. It's a miracle I didn't hurt myself, as the space was tiny. The cot was solid and had been used by 4 other kids before me without any problems. Once I could talk, things got even stranger. I had an imaginary friend called Mickey Bad, and I would have full conversations with him, sometimes even pretending to talk to my grandfather, who had passed away 3 years before I was born. My parents both noticed that I seemed to have some kind of psychic ability, often announcing visitors before they arrived. Before we moved, my parents would often find me screaming in the corner of my bedroom at 2 years old, unable to calm down for hours. The apartment was strange, too. Part of the bathroom had been walled off at some point, and it felt like it had been much bigger in the past. Anyone who used that bathroom always seemed to go in pairs. When I turned 2, my family moved to a new house because my brother had just been born. Things got even stranger there. One night, my dad was woken up by a bright light in the room. He thought he had left a light on, but when he got up, he realized the house was dark. He checked on my baby brother and discovered that his blanket had somehow shifted from being tucked in on one side to covering his face, almost suffocating him. My dad was sure that if he hadn't been woken by the light, my brother might not have been okay. Another time, my mom was checking on my brother in his cot when she dropped a glass she was holding. The glass shattered above my brother's head, but not one shard touched him. My mom swears it was like there was an invisible shield protecting him. When we were teenagers, there was another strange incident with my brother. We closed him in his bedroom, and he started kicking a football against the door and window. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash and saw the window shatter, except all the glass seemed to hang in the air, just above my brother's head. It was like there was an invisible force field around him, and none of the glass hit him. I was covered in shards, and it didn't make any sense. Since then, strange things have continued to happen. I see shadows around the house, especially in the back garden. Some friends have even claimed to see people in the house when I've been alone. When I'm in the bath, things move across the shelf on their own. Just last week, I was lying in bed, trying to relax before college, when I heard the loudest scream right next to me, followed by the feeling of someone sitting on the bed. It felt like a heavy weight was sitting beside me. The strange occurrences stopped for a while after my parents divorced, but they started up again when I was about 13 or 14. My dad and I are both very sensitive to this kind of thing, and it seems like it follows us wherever we go. Hey, my name's Glenn. I'm 17, and for the past few months, my mom, sisters, and I have been experiencing some really strange stuff. It all started the night of my oldest sister's 18th birthday. She walked into her room, and just before she turned on the light, she saw 3 or 4 black figures. Yes, there was alcohol involved, and maybe she was a bit drunk, but since that night, we've all seen, heard, or felt unexplainable things. My little sister has always been open to spirits. Ever since she was young, she would talk to what she called imaginary friends, which seemed normal until she started talking about someone named Amy McDonald. Amy was her imaginary friend, and at first, it was innocent. But then, after a few weeks, she started saying things like Amy died when she was young or Amy has a sore tummy. One day, we had an old family friend over. While we were talking, my little sister told my mom that Amy's chest was sore. That's when our family friend, who had lived in the area his whole life, got serious and told us that before our estate was built, there used to be an old bungalow on the land. The owners had a daughter named Amy who died when she was just 5, due to heart problems. Things didn't stop there. After what happened with my sister, I started feeling paranoid, so I began looking up information about ghosts and demons. I guess that opened some kind of door to the spirit world, because a few weeks later, I walked into my room and saw a woman standing there. She was around 5 feet 6 inches with a slim build, but the part that really terrified me was that she had no eyes. From her cheekbones to her eyebrows, there were just black pits. My mom always says, your eyes are the window to your soul, so I couldn't help but wonder, if she has no eyes, does that mean she has no soul? After that, my mom and older sister both started seeing the same man. They describe him the same way, and they both agree he feels evil. We've been seeing these figures since Christmas 2009. What's strange is that at least once a week, one of us will say, I saw them last night, and more often than not, the rest of us will have had an experience the same night. We've had the house blessed 4 times, and every time we do, we don't see anything for about a month, but then the figures always return. Hey, I wanted to share a story about my aunt's house and the strange things happening there. I talked to my aunt a few days ago, and she mentioned that nothing too unusual has happened recently, except that one of her kids doesn't like the dark and cries at night, while the other one laughs and talks to thin air. It may sound like normal kid behavior, but after everything that's happened, it makes you wonder. A few months after my aunt moved in, her neighbor asked her if she'd experienced anything strange in the house. My aunt mentioned the footsteps, banging, and other noises, and the neighbor admitted that she was relieved it wasn't just her. She thought she was going crazy. She said that the cutlery holder in her kitchen rattled and moved on its own, and her kettle boiled by itself a few times. After a few months, she moved out. My aunt suspects that the woman living next door to her is experiencing strange things too. She saw the woman one day, standing outside her house, looking like she wasn't sure whether to go in or not. My aunt didn't ask her if she'd experienced anything, so she doesn't know much more about that. One summer morning, my aunt and her partner were lying in bed when they heard the sound of hooves trotting on the cobblestones down the street. My aunt was sure she wasn't imagining it because her partner heard it too. He even opened the window to check, but saw nothing. The sound seemed to pass by their house, and it didn't sound like just one horse, but maybe 2 or 3. The land where my aunt's house is built is believed to be the site of a battle from the 1798 rebellion, which could explain some of these strange sounds. My cousin, who lives in a different part of the estate, had some strange experiences too. About 3 years ago, when she was pregnant, she was lying on the sofa in her sitting room, resting. The front door was open because her son was playing outside, and the sitting room door was just cracked open. She heard someone in the hall, thinking it was her son's friend coming in. She then heard the sitting room door open, and something touched her hair. When she turned around, nobody was there. She was shocked because the touch felt small, thin, and almost skeletal. This wasn't the only weird thing that happened at her house. A few weeks later, her son came in to ask if he could go downstairs to watch cartoons. She said he could, and that she'd follow in an hour. About 20 minutes later, she heard him scream. She rushed downstairs, and when she entered the sitting room, her son was standing against the wall, crying and scared. When she asked what happened, he said someone whispered his name in his ear. When she asked what the voice said, he said it just said Benin, and that it wasn't a nice voice like hers. So, to sum it up, there are 3 houses in this new housing estate with different people, and all of them are experiencing strange, paranormal things. I personally think that these spirits, if that's what they are, were disturbed when the houses were built. Maybe people died in the area or were buried there. I know a man who works in construction here in Ireland, and he told me that if bones are found when digging foundations, they usually just keep quiet about it. If they report it, they'll lose a lot of money, so they just carry on. In my opinion, that's what happened here. Hey, I thought I'd share some strange experiences my auntie has had in her house. These happenings started about 5 years ago when she moved in. The house was newly built, so there were no previous owners, and I don't live there, but I've witnessed some of these events myself. The first strange occurrence happened shortly after my auntie, Marie, moved in. She was in the shower when she suddenly felt like she was being watched. She rushed out, got dressed, and went to my Nan's house. A few nights later, she and her partner were watching TV when they heard heavy footsteps going up the stairs, as if a man was walking. They muted the TV to listen more closely, but the footsteps kept going. Marie told my granddad, who didn't believe her at first. He thought it was just the house settling or maybe some rodents. He even set traps, but nothing came of it. Apologies for the interruption. If you're enjoying the video, please let me know in the comments from where you are watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. A couple of weeks later, Marie and her partner were having drinks with her brother at home. The radio in the kitchen was playing softly when it suddenly turned up to full volume by itself. They froze in shock. When they went into the kitchen to turn it off, they heard a door upstairs bang and tiny footsteps running across the ceiling. Terrified, Marie called my dad for help. Later that night, my dad and my mother came over to talk about what had happened. My dad is a skeptic, so he went upstairs to see if there was a logical explanation. He and 2 of my uncles tried banging on the door as hard as they could, but they couldn't replicate the loud banging they heard earlier. There were no windows or doors open, and it was the middle of summer. My dad was stumped and suggested Marie call a priest to be safe. The priest arrived the following week and blessed the house. He believed Marie, and after the blessing, things seemed to calm down for a while. However, the radio continued to turn on by itself, the door would knock and open on its own, and the dogs acted strange in the house. Marie still felt uneasy when she was alone. A few months later, she showed me a strange photo she took on her stairs. At the time, she had 2 new kittens and a rabbit, and they were all playing on the stairs. In the photo, there was this strange, white, shadowy fog. The odd thing was that she took 3 pictures in quick succession, and only the 3rd one had the fog. There was nothing in the first 2. In the picture, you could make out what looked like several figures, though it's hard to say exactly what they were. The next strange occurrence happened about 2 summers ago when I was visiting my auntie. While sitting in her kitchen, the door knocked. I went to answer it, but it was already open, and nobody was there. A few moments later, I heard a buzzing noise, like when a TV screen goes black and white. I asked Marie what it was, and she told me it was the baby monitor in the sitting room. The one upstairs had been turned off. Marie shrugged and said this kind of thing had been happening a lot recently. She then told me about something that happened that weekend. Marie and her partner were sitting outside when they heard their baby, Abby, crying. Marie's partner went upstairs to check on her. When he did, he found that Abby's soother, which was clipped to her blanket, was hanging out at the foot of her cot. Abby was too young to unclip it herself, so this was strange. After settling Abby, Marie's partner caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure out of the corner of his eye, but when he turned to look, it disappeared. But that wasn't the end of it. One day, Marie and her partner were sitting outside when they noticed her car, which was parked right in front of them, had locked itself. The key fob was inside, hanging in the front door. To test it, they pressed the unlock button from inside, went back outside, and the car locked itself again. One night, after all these strange things, a woman approached Marie while she was out and told her there was a child named Edward living in her house. The woman said he wasn't there to scare Marie, just that he wanted her to know he was there. The strange part is, Marie had never told anyone, except for our family, about the happenings in her house. Though things have settled down a bit in recent years, Marie says you learn to live with it. The eerie thing is that it's not just my aunt's house. Other people in the neighborhood have had similar paranormal experiences. One important thing to note is that the land where Marie's house was built has a lot of history. It was once a battleground during the 1798 rebellion in Ireland. Could these spirits or energies be tied to that history? Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I was about 4 years old when I had my first experience with ghosts. They say kids have big imaginations, but the things I experienced were so strange and real, I knew something was off. We lived in a typical suburban housing estate at the time, nothing special, or so we thought. It started with small, unexplainable things, losing keys, doors being open when we knew we had closed them, not being able to heat certain rooms. I remember every morning waking up feeling frustrated because my favorite teddy would be missing, or my clothes that my mom left for me would be put on the top of the wardrobe, way out of reach. For a while, we blamed these things on fairies, but as time went on, the events became more intense and sinister. One winter, when there was heavy snow and the roads were closed, everything came to a head. Helicopters were dropping food supplies, and the snow was so deep it almost covered the front door. My dad had to climb out of the sitting room window to dig us out. That particular morning was terrifying for me, though. I woke up, groggy as usual, but realized my teddy was missing again. Then, when I turned on my little bedside lamp, I saw something that completely shook me. The wardrobe, which was a massive mahogany piece of furniture, had been pulled from one wall and placed in front of my door. Now, this wardrobe wasn't some lightweight piece of plywood. It took my dad and uncle an hour to get it up the stairs. And there it was, blocking the door, as if something had moved it. I was 4 years old, how could I explain that? I managed to climb onto my bed and use a shoe to get my dad's attention. He came upstairs and tried to move the wardrobe, but it wouldn't budge. Eventually, he had to get a ladder and climb in through the window to help me. The next night, I woke up screaming because my bed was moving across the room. The wardrobe doors were banging, and in the corner of the room, I saw 3 bald men sitting and playing cards. They had chains on their ankles and didn't even seem to care that I was screaming. They just looked at me for a moment and then went back to their game. My parents grabbed me and we left immediately, driving through the blizzard to my auntie's house. The next day, we went back to pack up our things, and that's when we found it. Every door in the house had a hole in it. Kitchen knives were stuck into photos, scissors were placed on pillows, and furniture was toppled over. My mom went to rehang a curtain in the sitting room and called my dad to look. She saw a man lying collapsed on the ground across the street. My dad rushed out to help, but when he got there, the man was gone. My mom kept shouting that he was over there, but there was no one to be found. At that point, we packed up and left for good. After we moved out, we heard strange reports from the neighbors, attacks in their gardens, unexplained fires, and no one could keep pets because they would always freak out or run away. Years later, my dad went to the local council office to check the area's history. It turns out half of the housing estate had been built on an old graveyard. The graveyard had been abandoned for so long that when they cleared the land, they didn't bother to put up headstones. They just built houses on top. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, but when you go through something like that, it makes you believe there's something beyond the physical world. Since then, I've had many other strange experiences, from hearing noises to noticing people in photos who shouldn't be there, to simply feeling like something is present with me. It's terrifying most of the time, and I wish I could logically explain it. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I'm not sure if I believe in premonitions, but 2 years ago, I had a series of dreams that felt like more than just bad luck. I think it was either late fall or early spring when it all began, and it was during a time when my little brother was going through some tough times. I was living overseas at the time, far from my family, and these dreams really disturbed me. It started with a nightmare. In the dream, my family and friends were all talking about how my little brother had died. They said he drowned himself. I was the only one who didn't believe it. "What are you talking about?" I kept saying. "He's not dead." "Yeah, he drowned, but he's not dead. I'll bring him back. You'll see." In the dream, I was walking into a small forest, and there was a swamp-like area in the middle. It didn't have much water, but it felt wrong. Somehow, I ended up drowning in the water, but I didn't die. Instead, I found myself in what looked like an eggshell, half filled with water. A man was sitting in the center, manipulating the waves. Next to me was my brother, floating in the water. I started yelling at him, "What did you do? Everyone thinks you're dead. You have to come back with me." He told me he couldn't leave because the man wouldn't let him. I told the man that my brother didn't belong there and that I was taking him back. The man finally let us go, and we made our way home. Everyone was so happy my brother was alive. When I woke up, I couldn't shake the bad feeling. It felt like more than just a bad dream. I called my mom, even though she wasn't the type to believe in things like that. I had to know my brother was okay. She laughed it off, telling me it was just a bad dream and that he was fine. A few days later, I had another dream. In this one, I was flying home on a plane, sitting next to my mom. She was telling me my brother had been in a bad car accident but that he would survive. We never made it to the hospital because, when we landed, my mom got into an argument with a young woman in the street. When I woke up, I had that same uneasy feeling, but I didn't call my mom. I didn't want to seem crazy, so I kept the dream to myself. Later that day, I finally called home. My mom mentioned how my brother had been acting strangely quiet and withdrawn, not like himself. Then she told me about something that made my heart drop. My brother had been playing with some older boys, throwing stones, when a car came speeding down a normally quiet road. He was the only one in its path. Luckily, he wasn't hit, but the situation was serious. The social worker from his school even came to my mom's work to explain what had happened. What really shook me was how closely this matched the dream I had just days before. I hadn't told my mom about the car accident dream, but now it felt like everything was lining up. Then, my mom mentioned something else that chilled me. A week before, my brother had walked onto an iced-over pond, a dangerous thing to do, especially for a kid his age. I couldn't believe it. I dreamed about his accident, and then that had happened too. Everything was happening so quickly. First, the drowning dream, then the car accident, and the near disaster with the ice. It was all too much to ignore. It felt like the dreams were warnings. I didn't know how to explain it, but I couldn't dismiss it either. A few weeks later, I had yet another dream. This one was the most disturbing. In it, I had the overwhelming feeling that I needed to save my brother from my mother, because she was going to hurt him. I couldn't tell if my brother had done something that made her angry, or if it was something darker, but in the dream, my brother was hanged. I woke up feeling frantic. I didn't hesitate. I sent my mother an email, telling her to be careful with anything that could be dangerous, like ropes or cords, and to take extra care with my brother, especially if he was acting out. Not long after that, my mother told me that my brother had been struggling with thoughts of suicide and had even threatened to hurt other kids at school. Luckily, he's doing much better now. He's calmer, less angry, and seems to be in a better place. Looking back, I still don't know what to make of all this. Maybe it was just my mind processing the stress and worry I had for my brother, or maybe it was something more. I never had another dream like that again. But the timing of everything, how my dreams seemed to line up with real events, was too strange to ignore.
These strange events took place from February to August of 2009. My friend and I decided it was time to move out of our family homes and get a flat together in our hometown of Sligo. The flat was beautiful, located right across from the ruins of an old abbey dating back to the 12th century, though technically it's a friary. The history of the area was fascinating. During the times of Cromwell, several monks were hanged, drawn, and quartered for refusing to give up their faith. The place also had a dark history of plague and cholera outbreaks, with victims being thrown over the abbey walls for burial. The view from our living room window was incredible, and I loved looking out at the ruins every morning. It was so peaceful, despite the dark past. The flats themselves were remodeled 19th century houses, and local legend says that Bram Stoker's mother grew up on this very street. Our first strange encounter happened on the day we moved in. We were in the kitchen finishing some paperwork and chatting on the phone. As we were talking, I noticed that the cupboard door above the cooker was open, so I closed it. But then, right in front of us, it slowly opened again. We were both silent for a moment before we just laughed it off. Later, while cleaning up, we found a meat cleaver hidden under the sink. It was a bizarre thing to find, but we just agreed not to open that cupboard again. There was something about it that gave us a strange feeling. The next strange occurrence happened during our first week. I was sitting alone in the living room, on my laptop, when I suddenly heard a weird groaning noise coming from the massive storage closet. Then, a growling sound followed. I was too scared to move, so I put on my headphones to block out any other noises. About a month later, my flatmate saw a dark shape move from the front door to the kitchen. She thought it was me, but when I returned a few hours later, she was unnerved because she realized she hadn't seen me leave. A few weeks after that, I was washing dishes and put the tin opener on the counter. I dried it off and left it next to the sink so my flatmate could use it the next day. But when she went to find it the next morning, it was gone. We searched the kitchen, but it was nowhere to be found. I knew I had left it there. 2 days later, my flatmate found the tin opener hidden under the dishcloth, even though we had checked there 3 times. Not long after that, my flatmate tried to light a candle in the living room/kitchen, but it wouldn't light. After about 10 minutes, she finally managed to get it to stay lit. Then, a few minutes later, the flame went out. She gave up and decided to go to the supermarket. When she came back about 20 minutes later, the candle was lit again, but the wax around the flame suggested it had only been burning for a few minutes. She was alone at the time, and I wasn't even home that night. A couple of days later, I was at home with my mom, and she was talking about painting the kitchen while I sat by the table trying to get my computer to work. Suddenly, my mom screamed and pointed at the table. The fruit bowl was acting strangely. The part of the bowl that holds bananas was bouncing up and down as if someone had pulled on it, but no one was near it. 3 days later, I was sitting on my bed watching a movie when I saw a weird shape appear in the doorway. At first, I thought it was just the light reflecting off my eyelashes, so I tried to recreate the effect, but it didn't work. I got up and closed the door, but the feeling of unease stayed with me. Things stayed quiet for a couple of months after that. But I started to get a strange, irrational fear of the hallway. I could never look toward my flatmate's room without feeling scared, especially when going to the bathroom. Then one day, I came home from work to find the front door half open, even though I had locked it when I left that morning and my flatmate hadn't left the flat that day. One evening, when I was coming back to the flat after visiting my family, something strange happened. A large black dog greeted me at the end of my street and walked with me all the way to the flat. When I got to the door, the dog stopped, dropped me off, and wandered off into the night. Then, one Friday night, I went to bed and turned off the light, like usual. The light switch clicked a few minutes later, as it always did. But then, 10 minutes after that, I heard the same click by my ear. I assumed I was imagining things, so I tried to sleep. But at 3 a.m., I heard my wardrobe door slam shut, even though it was already closed. I wondered if my flatmate had come into my room, but when I checked, I was alone. I ended up sleeping with the light on. Finally, in August, I had to move to Dublin for college, and my flatmate couldn't afford the place without me, so we decided to leave. The last night we were there, I had just returned from feeding my dogs at my family home. My flatmate told me that a door had closed by itself and that the kettle had clicked on just minutes before I returned. We always joked that it was one of the monks from the abbey across the street, maybe just checking up on us. While we were definitely spooked by some of the strange happenings, we never felt like we weren't welcome. It was an eerie place, but not malicious.
My wife, on the other hand, had always believed in the afterlife. She attended angel card readings and even suggested that I give it a try. It might give you some direction, she said. So, I went along, not really expecting much, but surprisingly, the reading left me feeling better. The reader told me that I had a light within me, something that would help bring good to others. She said I was about to enter a new spiritual chapter in my life, even though I didn't quite understand what that meant at the time. But, the words stuck with me. It felt nice to hear them. A couple of months passed, and I almost forgot about the reading. But something inside me was shifting. It sounds strange, but I started hearing voices. Not voices from outside, but my own voice, like someone else's thoughts slipping into my mind. At first, I thought I was losing it. I didn't know what was going on. During that time, my second youngest child, Cameron, began waking up every night between 1 and 4 a.m., crying uncontrollably. It was exhausting, and I didn't know how to help him. Then, one night, everything changed. It was around 12:30 a.m., and I was watching a movie while my family slept. I walked down the hallway toward our bedroom, and as I passed Cameron's room, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly and saw a figure, a small, ghostly child, about 3 feet tall. The bottom half of him looked solid, but the top half appeared faded and incomplete, like a blurry outline. He darted behind the half-open door to Cameron's room. I rushed in, flinging the door open. But by the time I got there, the figure was gone. I saw only a blur as it rushed past my son's bed, vanishing into thin air. Then, Cameron let out a loud, terrified roar. I froze, standing there for a moment, listening to him scream. My heart pounded as I went to wake my wife. I told her that Cameron was crying, but deep down, I knew something was off. She managed to get him back to sleep and came back out to the hallway. I could tell she knew something was wrong with me. I told her what I had seen, and she was immediately convinced. She believed me without question, and that shook me. Up until that point, I had never seen anything like it, and I wasn't scared at all, just deeply confused. The next day, my wife contacted her cousin, who's a quantum healer. She told her about the ghostly encounter, and her cousin asked her spirit guide to look into it. The guide revealed that the spirit was a boy, about 4 years old, who had been trying to make himself known to my wife but had failed. Now, he had turned his attention to me. The spirit wasn't harmful, though. He just wanted to find his parents and enjoyed playing with Cameron. 2 weeks later, a spiritual cleanser named Michael Anthony arrived at our house. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. Cameron's nightmares grew worse, and the voices in my head intensified. I started hearing strange sounds too, soft knocks on the bedroom window, whispers in the hallway, and fragments of words that seemed to come from nowhere. It was unsettling. When Michael arrived, he immediately sensed the energy around Cameron. He said that Cameron had a unique ability, he could see and hear things that others couldn't, that the spirits around him could choose to make themselves known. He told us that this ability might fade when Cameron turned 7, or it could continue. I didn't know what to make of it. Michael then told me something that really struck me. He said the boy I'd seen in Cameron's room had died in 1912 from tuberculosis. He had been lost and was looking for his parents. He wasn't a malicious spirit, he was just a child who wanted to play. But the message didn't end there. Michael called me aside and said he had something personal to tell me. He said that my friend, who had died in a car crash at 20, was reaching out from the other side, wishing me well. Then, he told me something that shocked me. I had a ghost attached to me. This spirit had died recently, he was electrocuted. Michael said he was Polish and had followed me from my workplace, a recycling plant where I'd worked a few months earlier. He had been hoping to find his way home. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't recognize the spirit, and I brushed it off. But after Michael left, I decided to search for information. I looked up a Polish man who had died in a similar accident, and to my shock, I found someone who matched the description perfectly. He had died in 2007 from an electrocution at a recycling plant in Wexford, Ireland. I froze in disbelief. Just 3 months earlier, I had been working there for the ESB, the National Electrical Service. Somehow, this man had followed me, hoping to find peace. I used to be just an ordinary guy, living a normal life. Now, everything feels different, like the world has opened up in ways I can't explain. It's both unnerving and fascinating, and I'm left wondering what's next. I am sharing a story about the old fisherman's cottage where my family lived, a place I always thought was haunted. We moved out in October 2002, leaving the beach behind and settling in a new house on a small hill just outside of town. It wasn't an old house like the one by the sea, but still, something about it always felt off. This house was relatively new, only about 10 years old, set in a quiet housing estate with a front and back garden. You walk through the front door, and to your left is the living room. To the right, you have the stairs, with a bathroom tucked underneath. The kitchen and dining room are straight ahead, and past that is the entrance to the extension, which had a utility room, my old bedroom, and an ensuite bathroom. Upstairs, the layout was simple. The main bathroom was at the top of the stairs, with my parents' bedroom to the immediate left. My brother's room was at the front of the house, and right beside it was mine. When we first moved in, I remember finding bits of glass scattered across the carpets. My cousin, who had lived in the house before us, told me it used to be a flat. She said that several families had lived there, and it was always full of shouting and trouble. She didn't go into much detail, but I could tell by the look in her eyes that there was more to the story. At first, things were quiet, just the usual creaks and rustlings that come with a new house. I tried to convince myself it was just settling noises. I was living downstairs at the time, enjoying the fact that I had my own bathroom and easy access to the kitchen. But even then, there were nights when I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me through the window, or that someone was rummaging through the coal bunker, even though it was locked. I ignored it, but there was one thing I couldn't quite explain: my intense aversion to the bathroom under the stairs. It didn't matter if it was day or night, I just couldn't bring myself to use that bathroom. It felt like there was someone always watching me from the small window, the one they hadn't removed when the extension was built. It was a strange, unsettling feeling that I couldn't shake. Then my grandmother came to stay with us, which meant I had to move upstairs to one of the bedrooms. I now had to use the main bathroom, and that meant walking past the stairs and down the long hallway at night. For some reason, I developed an irrational fear of hallways, especially at night. They always felt like dark, endless tunnels, and the sense of someone lurking nearby was overwhelming. I tried to avoid looking into the hallway, keeping my eyes straight ahead as I walked quickly to the bathroom. Sometimes, I'd glance at my brother's bedroom, and I'd swear I saw a figure sitting on his bed. But when I looked again, it was gone. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but when I looked a second time, the figure was never there. Then, one night, things took a terrifying turn. I woke up at 3 a.m. for no reason, just suddenly wide awake. As I lay there in the dark, wondering what had woken me, I heard a sharp, unmistakable knock on my window. My heart raced in my chest. I wasn't dreaming. I was on the first floor. How could someone be knocking at my window? The knocking came again, and I just lay there, too scared to move. The third time it happened, I was frozen with fear. I turned on my bedside light, but I didn't dare look out the window. Instead, I switched on the radio, hoping the sound would drown out the fear gnawing at me. But even with the radio on, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching me through the window above my door. The real horror came in a dream I had a few nights later, a dream I still can't forget, even though it's been years. It started in the kitchen, where I was cooking. Suddenly, the old phone on the wall beside the hall door started ringing. I rushed to answer it, and when I did, I heard something that still chills me to this day: the screams of children, full of agony and terror. I could feel my heart stop in my chest. It wasn't just the screams, it was the sense of pain, the hopelessness that came with them. I slammed the phone down, horrified, and ran to the door, hoping to escape the house. But as I ran down the hallway, I felt something dark gathering behind me, something evil and terrifying. I couldn't bring myself to look back. I didn't want to know what it was. I ran into the living room and slammed the door shut, just in time. The moment I thought I was safe, the screams started again, louder and more horrifying than before. It felt like they were surrounding me, filling the room. I collapsed to the floor in terror, crying out for help that I knew would never come. My mother woke me up just then, saying she had heard me sobbing in my sleep. I was in a state of shock, trembling and unable to go back to sleep. Since that night, I've never been able to sit in the living room after midnight, and I always make sure the kitchen door is closed before bed. I've never had another experience like that in the house, but it still feels unsettled. My neighbor, who lives a few houses down, told me she feels the same way about her hallway and living room. She, too, has had some strange experiences. Not long ago, I found out that our housing estate was built on land that was once used for hanging. It started like any other night. My girlfriend and I were fast asleep, but she's prone to nightmares, so it's not unusual for her to wake up startled. Typically, I reassure her it's just a dream, and she drifts back to sleep. But that night was unlike anything we've ever experienced. I was jolted awake by her loud, piercing scream. I sat up immediately, seeing her already upright in bed. My first instinct was to comfort her, to tell her it was just another nightmare. But as I turned toward her, my heart stopped. There, crouched over both of us, was a figure. I screamed. It wasn't a cry of shock or surprise, it was raw fear. My girlfriend, hearing me scream, scrambled out of bed to turn on the main light. She wears strong prescription glasses, so she couldn't see much without them, but I could. And what I saw chilled me to my core. Even with the light on, the figure was still there. It was gray, and though I couldn't make out detailed features, I could feel its presence. Instinctively, I began swiping at it, trying to keep it away from my girlfriend. At first, I thought it might be an intruder, someone who had broken into our apartment. But as I kept looking, it became clear this wasn't human. My girlfriend, still shaken and unable to see clearly, told me she'd been dreaming about spiders crawling all over the bed. She said it felt like something had scratched her arm, which is what caused her to scream. But she couldn't see what I was seeing. In a burst of adrenaline, I jumped out of bed, ready to confront whatever this thing was. But when I turned to face it, it was gone. Just like that. The room was empty, yet the air felt heavy, as if the figure was still lingering somewhere nearby. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The eerie sensation, that cold, spine-tingling feeling that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, lingered long after. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told my girlfriend everything. She thought I was overreacting, saying I'd probably been spooked by her nightmare. But I knew what I saw. I was awake, and that figure was there. It wasn't my imagination. As we talked, we realized this wasn't the only strange thing that had happened in our apartment. My girlfriend reminded me of a vivid dream she'd had one night while sleeping in the spare room. She'd moved there because I was snoring too loudly. In the dream, two men walked into the room and calmly told her to come with them, saying she was dead. She described the dream as unsettling but not frightening. The men didn't seem threatening, just matter of fact. And then there are the other incidents. We've come home to find pictures on the floor, as if they'd been thrown down, yet the wall plugs were still firmly in place. I've often been alone in the apartment and felt a strange presence, an invisible weight in the room. The sensation of being watched is so strong that the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Yet when I look around, nothing seems out of the ordinary. We live near an old graveyard, which my friends say could explain the activity. Some have even suggested having a priest come to bless the apartment. I'm seriously considering it because what I saw and the other things we've experienced defy logical explanation. When I told my mom about the figure, she reminded me of something from my childhood. Apparently, I used to talk about strange dreams all the time. My parents even had my older brother pretend to go to bed with me so I could fall asleep. I remember doors opening and closing by themselves, or the handles rattling as if someone was trying to get in. I also recall hearing footsteps on the stairs, but when I'd run to check, no one was there. I can't shake the feeling that this isn't just about the apartment, that it might be about me. Maybe I've always been sensitive to things others can't see. Maybe I need to be blessed, too. All I know is that what I saw wasn't a dream, and I'll never forget how it made me feel. When I was a teenager, my friends and I would often hang out at one of their houses. It was a big old place, and the stories we'd heard about it had always intrigued me. My friend had told us plenty of strange things that had happened there, involving her family. Doors locking by themselves, strange noises, the family dog acting oddly, it was hard to ignore. While I never doubted the stories, I never really felt scared by them either. After all, my own house was full of strange, spooky vibes most of the time. So, anything unusual in her house didn't seem like much to me, it might even be a welcome change. Let me start by telling you about some of the odd things that had happened to her family. For years, they'd felt a presence in the house. It wasn't just one thing, it was a series of strange events. Doors would lock on their own, doorknobs would twist by themselves, and sometimes, the family dog would act differently. But the creepiest experience, at least in my opinion, was when someone in the family saw a tall figure standing in a doorway upstairs. It had a large head, and its eyes were strange, one pointed up, the other down. That's the kind of thing that would make anyone stop and wonder. But I never experienced anything like that myself. That is, until one night during a sleepover at my friend's house. We were all telling ghost stories, trying to freak each other out, as you do when you're a teenager. I was sleeping by the fireplace, and honestly, I wasn't thrilled about it. I had heard so many stories about the house by then, and I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. At first, everything seemed normal. But then something odd started happening. The interior shutters, those old wooden ones you find in Georgian houses, began to shake. It was subtle at first, just a little movement. But then, it started happening faster, more violently, as if a storm had suddenly hit the house. We all looked at each other, trying to stay calm. The wind outside didn't make sense, though. It was a warm summer night. There wasn't even the faintest breeze. We tried to rationalize it, telling ourselves it must have been some freak gust of wind, though, of course, that didn't explain why the shutters were on the inside of the house. We were definitely a little on edge by then. But just when things were starting to get too much, we heard the front door slam open. We heard footsteps running up the stairs, and then the sound of the bathroom door opening, followed by the flush of a toilet. We all breathed a sigh of relief. It was a family friend, we figured, probably coming back for the night. I know I felt better. Human activity was exactly what we needed to break the tension. But the next morning, we discovered something strange. No one had come back that night. In fact, no one had even gone out. We were all left standing there, puzzled. The house had been eerily quiet since we'd gone to bed, but it felt as if someone had been there with us, someone or something we hadn't seen. I've often wondered what could explain that night. It seemed like poltergeist activity, things moving on their own, noises that didn't have an easy explanation. But if it was a ghost, why didn't it show itself more clearly? I've read that poltergeist activity can sometimes happen when there's a buildup of energy, but this felt different. When I was younger, my mom told me I used to talk about seeing a little girl in a white dress. Now, I can't remember it myself, but the image stuck with me. At the time, I just assumed it was my overactive imagination trying to scare me. However, over the past couple of years, I've started seeing her again. This time, I can't see her face, but I can always make out her long dark hair and the little nightdress she wears. She looks about 10 years old. The most unsettling part? I always spot her when I'm alone, either looking after my little brother or when I'm up in the attic playing computer games. There's something else, too. In my mom's room, there's a strange patch of dirt on one side of the wardrobe. It's odd because the wardrobe is the same style as everyone else's, but this mark looks like someone has finger painted a tiny image of an angel curled up in a fetal position. It's hard not to connect the dots. My mom had a miscarriage a few years ago, and I wonder, could this little girl be a sibling I never had? Could she have been a part of my family? Why is it only me who sees her? And why does she never have a face, almost like she's nameless? I haven't seen her in a few weeks, and I'm not sure why. I usually catch glimpses of her when I'm minding my brother or in the attic, but when I do, she's fast, almost as if she doesn't want to be seen. It's like a child getting caught doing something they shouldn't. She never talks, just moves quickly out of sight. But even though she's fast, there's something about her that makes me feel like she's watching me. I wonder if she followed me from our old house. We moved here not too long ago, and the thought crossed my mind, could she have gotten lost trying to find me? I've heard that sometimes spirits follow people, but I don't know if that's true. All I know is that when I see her, she scares me. I haven't gotten used to it yet, and I'm not sure if I ever will. Lately, things have gotten stranger. It usually happens at night, just as I'm about to fall asleep. I close my eyes, and then I wake up to the sensation of something pulling my hair or poking me in the side. It feels like someone's trying to lift me out of bed, and it's terrifying. This has been happening on and off for the past 4 or 5 months, and it's not just a bad dream. It feels so real. I know dreams can be intense, but this feels different. It's almost as if I can't move, and I'm powerless to stop it. For the past few nights, it's only gotten worse. I've woken up to my hair being pulled, my sides being poked, and an overwhelming coldness in the room. At first, I thought maybe my hairband was the cause, but after I took it out, the pulling still happened. And the poking, it's like someone's trying to wake me up, urging me to get up, but in the most unsettling way. Wake up, it feels like they're saying without saying anything at all. It's been really hard to sleep lately. In the past 3 days, I've only managed about 8 hours of rest. I'm exhausted, and I don't know what's going on. So, I bought a dream catcher, hoping that if this is all some sort of nightmare, I can catch whatever spirits are causing it. But I still feel the same. I'm not sure what to make of all of this. I feel like the experiences could be harmless, but they scare me. Should I try asking whatever this is to leave me alone? Should I tell the little girl or whatever she is that I don't want to be scared anymore? Maybe I'll get used to it one day, but right now, I'm not sure. A friend of mine, who lives just up the road, has had her own experiences. She sees spirits in her house, 2 ones that throw things around and even turn the TV on and off. She's had a lot of encounters with them, but they're much more active than the ones I see. Sometimes, I wonder if the spirits in our homes are connected, or if it's just something about the land itself. We live in Ongar, Dublin, near Blanchardstown and Clonee. I've heard rumors that parts of our estate were built on old burial grounds or farmland. I wonder if that's got something to do with it.
I grew up in a very remote area, a place where the nearest neighbor was miles away. It was so isolated that, for the most part, I had no one to play with. I spent most of my childhood alone, lost in my own world of imagination. There were all sorts of stories about the area, but I didn't hear them until much later. People talked about giant black dogs, a witch's grave, and strange happenings in the woods. But, to be honest, I never saw any of that. What I did experience, though, was something that still unsettles me to this day. One of the strangest experiences came from treasure hunters who claimed to have been chased by massive black dogs and had heard evil laughter echoing through the woods. That story, while creepy, didn't hit me as hard as something that happened to me directly. This one is by far the worst. It started when I was around 8 years old. Living in such a remote place meant that I didn't have many friends, so I played outside by myself a lot. But as I got older, I began to feel like I wasn't alone. At first, it was just a sense that something was watching me. I'd catch glimpses of movement, shadows ducking behind walls or cars. I'd hear footsteps on the gravel, but when I looked, there was never anyone there. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was my imagination, or maybe an animal. But over time, the feeling of being watched became too much to shake off. One day, I decided to confront whatever it was. I had been playing when I saw the shadow move behind the car again. This time, I made up my mind I was going to figure out who or what it was. I slowly walked toward the car, keeping an eye on the spot where I'd seen the shadow. When I peeked around, I saw a figure. It was jet black, humanoid in shape, but without any real features. It was just standing there, staring right at me. The moment I saw it, I turned and ran straight back inside. I couldn't get back into the house fast enough. From that point on, I didn't dare play outside by myself again. Now, fast forward a few years. My sister had just moved out after finishing college and landing a good job as a psychiatric nurse. I was thrilled because it meant I could move into her much bigger room. It was a nice change from my cramped little bedroom. The only problem? The window catch was broken. It wasn't fully open, but there was always this cold draft that would slip in at night. For the first few years, it wasn't too bad. A little chilly, but nothing out of the ordinary. But then, when I was between 17 and 18, something started to change. I began to feel these really bad vibes late at night. At first, it was subtle, a strange feeling that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I figured it was just the draft or maybe the house settling. But it didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. By the time September and October of 2008 rolled around, the feeling had become intense. It wasn't just the draft anymore. I could sense something moving around my room, as though it was pacing. At its worst, I felt something sit on my bed, and once or twice, I felt a light touch on my hair. It was as if something or someone was right next to me. I tried to brush it off. I'd been living with these strange sensations for years, but now it was becoming hard to ignore. I moved away for college, but I still returned home on the weekends. Every Saturday night, without fail, the presence would return. It wasn't always there, but when it was, it felt suffocating. Sometimes, it would visit me on Friday nights, too. And then came the night that really terrified me. I was at my sister's house, staying in the spare room. The room was pitch black, as dark as you could imagine, and that same feeling of unease settled in again. Only this time, it was different. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel something in the room with me. Then, in the utter silence, it spoke to me. I don't remember what it said or if it even spoke words at all. But whatever it was, it made me feel sick to my stomach. I was so shaken that I vomited right there in the room. I remember screaming at the top of my lungs. It was horrible. I tried to tell my sister and brother-in-law it was just a bad dream, that something I ate had made me sick. But I knew deep down it wasn't just a dream. I could still feel it lingering in the air. The next few days were rough. The feeling of being watched and touched didn't go away, but it eventually stopped. The visits grew less frequent, and by the time I moved out for good, I hadn't experienced anything like that in a while. Except for one last incident. A few days after the final encounter, I woke up to the feeling of something lightly touching my head. Not like before, this wasn't cold or menacing, just a soft, reassuring touch. It didn't scare me, but it felt odd. And that was the last time I've had any of these experiences. Since then, I haven't felt anything strange in that room, or anywhere else. I've never had the sense of being watched again. And I'm hoping it stays that way. But every now and then, I can't help but wonder, what was that? What was it that I felt? I'm 21 now, and the memory of those nights still lingers, even though I haven't experienced anything since. I don't know if it was the house, or something else entirely. I just hope it never comes back. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.
I want to share a story that was told to me by my school's 6th year form master. Before I dive into it, let me give you a bit of background about the school. It's really old, dating back to the 1800s, and with that long history, it's no surprise that there are a lot of strange rumors. I can't name the school for obvious reasons, but I'll just say, for the sake of this story, that I believe what I've been told. In the early 1900s, someone was murdered in the school, specifically in the 6th year corridor. There's official documentation to confirm that, but as one of my friends told me, a mad friar burned the archives in the 1950s, wiping out most of the records. My school is run by a religious order, but they're very secretive about the whole thing. When my friend asked one of the friars about it, he reluctantly confirmed that there had been a murder. But another friar told me the murder never happened at all. So, while there are all sorts of rumors about the place, I won't get into them here. The layout of the school is a little quirky. It has a lot of fields surrounding it, and the main buildings are in the center. Right in the middle of the main building is an open-air courtyard. On one side, you'll find the classrooms for the 1st and 2nd years, and the rest of the sides are filled with different rooms and passages. Upstairs, on the 1st floor, are the 3rd, 4th, and 5th year classrooms, along with the labs and some other rooms. The 2nd floor is where the 6th year corridor is located, and that's where the murder is said to have taken place. Apologies for the interruption. If you're enjoying the video, please let me know in the comments from where you are watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The 6th year corridor is a strange shape, imagine a question mark, but with corners where the curves would be. One of the rooms up there is sealed off now. It used to be a common room when the school was a boarding school, but now it serves no real purpose. All that's left is a door that leads to nowhere. And it's behind that door that the murder took place over a century ago. Now, here's where the story gets interesting. One night, at around 9 p.m., my form master was up in the 6th year corridor. The doors to the corridor are locked at night, but he had a key and went up to check on something. After unlocking the door, he made sure to lock it behind him so no one could follow him in. He switched on the lights and began walking down the corridor. When he reached the classroom with the sealed door, he looked over at it, and then something caught his eye. He saw a man standing still in the corridor. The man was dressed oddly, like someone from the past. He wore a waistcoat, trousers that reached his knees, a bow tie, and had shoulder-length straight hair that was combed back. My teacher only saw the side of his face, but he said the man looked solemn, almost depressed. Creeped out by the sight, my teacher quickly made his way to his office. He gathered his things, and when he looked back, the man was gone. No one else was in the corridor. Now, when I hear a ghost story, I try to keep an open mind, but I also like to think of possible explanations. I trust my teacher completely, and I don't think he's lying. I really can't imagine someone sneaking into the corridor dressed up in old-fashioned clothes to try and prank him. This story comes from my older brother, G, and it's one of the strangest ones I've heard that stuck with me for years. I'm not using his real name, so let's just call him G, and my other brother E, both older than me, so I wasn't even born when this happened. It was the summer of 1965, and every year, G and E would hitchhike from the north of Ireland, Ulster, down to the Free State, the Republic of Ireland, to visit their aunts and other relatives. This was long before the Northern Irish troubles started, so things were more peaceful back then. But getting back to the story, G and E were on their way south, hitching a ride, stopping at different houses to ask for directions, maybe get a glass of lemonade, or even a sandwich. It was G's turn to ask for directions when they came across a long, winding driveway. E stayed at the bottom of the drive, sitting on an old stone wall, while G walked up towards the farmhouse at the top. It was a warm summer day, with just a few clouds drifting across the pale blue Irish sky. As G reached the farmhouse, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a typical Irish farmhouse, painted white with faded blue windowsills, a thatched roof, and a barn attached to the back. But the strangest thing was the number of cats. There were cats everywhere, different shapes, sizes, and colors, all meowing and rubbing against him as he made his way across the cobblestone courtyard. He said it felt like there were millions of them, all purring and meowing as they crowded around him, making it difficult to move. He finally made it to the front door and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, this time louder, but still no response. The cats were getting closer, some hanging off the roof, others coming out of the barn and crossing the courtyard towards him. Feeling uneasy, G walked over to a large bay window and peeked inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. Inside, there were 13 cats sitting in a circle, staring down at something in a hole in the floor. Then, all at once, the cats looked up at him, their eyes wide, and they grinned just like the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. G screamed in terror, kicking a few cats out of his way, and bolted back down the driveway, shouting for E to come and see. But when he turned around, he saw that E was already halfway down the road, running and screaming himself. When G got home, my late granny, who had some great ghost stories herself, which I'll share soon, called him into the kitchen. Somehow, she had already heard about what happened. G told her the whole story, and when he finished, she told him something that made his hair stand on end. She said that the house was infamous. It was known as the Vanishing House of Windy Willows, and it only appeared once every 50 years. G was stunned. How's that for a ghost story? A few weeks later, G went back with some friends to try and find the house again, but it was gone. I remember in 1994, when I was in Ireland, G gave me the directions to the place. I went searching, but I couldn't find it either. I've had my share of strange experiences over the years, though I wouldn't consider myself psychic. What's odd is that it all seemed to start after we moved to Ireland, and it's happened in every place I've lived since then. The first place where these odd occurrences started was a little cottage in Ross's Point, a coastal village in County Sligo, in the northwest of Ireland. We moved to Ireland from England when I was 9, in the summer of 1997. My dad had always wanted to live in Ross's Point, and after a while living in a camper van, my parents found an old fisherman's cottage with an extension. The house was about 100 years old and had a perfect view of the channel that runs from Sligo Bay into the town. Ships still sail in and out of the channel to this day. Ross's Point is a small, very old fishing village, so there was always a sense of history in the air. We moved in during the last week of August 1997, and almost immediately, both my mom and I had this constant feeling that something wasn't quite right with the house. We didn't know exactly what it was, but we both agreed it felt haunted. In fact, the whole village had that vibe. Almost every house had its own story to tell. The original cottage was small and cold, with 2 rooms on either side of a hallway. The front door would only open if there had been a stretch of sunny weather, rare for that part of Ireland. The hallway itself was windowless, which made it feel even more cramped and dark. Each of the 2 rooms on either side had a large window with a beautiful view of the village road. My parents took one room for their bedroom, and the other became the spare room. My brother and I hated walking down that hallway, especially when it was dark. My brother refused to do it at night, and even during the day, we would often close our eyes and rush down the hall to avoid looking down it. It was hard to explain, but we both felt like something was there, watching us. Soon after, an extension was built at the back of the house, turning the hallway into the entrance for the new part. There was now a side door that we used to come in and out of the house, which felt a little less eerie. In the new extension, my brother and I each had our own bedroom upstairs, and downstairs was the living room, a tiny kitchen, and a very small bathroom. But despite the new rooms, something about the spare room, the one that had been my parents' before the extension, was always unsettling. The room never got any radio signal, no matter how much we tried to tune it in. I kept my rabbit and guinea pig in there, and one day when I was about 11, I was sitting in that room when I heard a breath right behind me. A soft blow of air. It felt like someone was standing there. I froze, terrified, and it took all my strength to put my pets back in their cage without dropping them. Another time, I went into the room to feed them, only to find the cage door wide open. The wire had been cut, but there were no scissors or clippers around. My brother swore up and down that it wasn't him. That was just one of the strange things that happened in that house. Years later, my mom and I went back to visit my grandmother in England. We were passing a house when I remarked that it looked like a perfect haunted house. I jokingly said, "I've never seen a ghost, and I probably would die of fear if I did." To my surprise, my mom turned to me and said, "You have seen a ghost before." I was confused, so she reminded me of something that had happened shortly after we moved into the cottage. Apologies for the interruption. If you're enjoying the video, please let me know in the comments from where you are watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Apparently, I had woken up one morning and asked my mom why there was a strange lady sitting at my desk the night before. I had looked down the end of my room and saw her. She was dressed in clothes from the late 19th century, and I remember describing her appearance in vivid detail. My mom said I was calm about it, which was strange because I was usually easily frightened. The odd part was that I was sure of what I had seen. Things like that kept happening in the house. Items would go missing, only to turn up days later in places we'd already searched. One time, a very important bill disappeared and reappeared 3 days later, buried under a pile of laundry that had just been taken off the line. When we finally told a friend who lived a few houses down about all this, she told us something that sent a chill down my spine. She had moved into her own cottage, and one night while she was in her room, 2 fishermen had walked into her bedroom. They looked at her, nodded, and then disappeared. It was as if they were acknowledging her, letting her know they were there. She also said she would smell cigarette smoke in certain rooms, even though she didn't smoke. There were plenty of other small incidents, things falling off the walls, lights flickering, doors creaking, but there was never a sense of danger. It was like the spirits just didn't want to be forgotten. They were part of the house's history, and they wanted to make sure we remembered that. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. It was my first trip overseas in 1994, back to my homeland of Ireland, the place where I was born, though I'd been raised in Australia. Ireland, the land of fairies, poets, ancient heroes, and, of course, the supernatural. I stayed with my sister in West Cork, in a lovely stone cottage with a stunning view of pine-covered forests and fields so green, they almost seemed unreal. You've probably heard that there are 5 different shades of green in Ireland. It's true. Anyway, after a few weeks with my sister and her family, I decided it was time to head out on a bike trip around the country. So, there I was, cycling along the coast, spending a few nights here and there, when I finally got tired of the coastline. I pulled out my trusty map and decided it would be quicker to cycle through the mountains to get to Dingle, which was on the coast. I remember there was an old church at the crossroads, so I took the left-hand road, which led me to a small garage. Perfect, I thought, I could use a Coke and a Mars bar. I went inside and was served by a little old lady. She asked where I was headed, and I told her Dingle. She said, "You'll be better off taking the coast road." I told her no, I was going through the mountains. By this point, the whole family, including the dog and the cat, had gathered around and started saying, "Don't go through the mountains, go by the coast." Why? I asked. No reason. Just go by the coast, they all insisted. I was getting a bit frustrated by now, so I paid for my Coke and Mars bar and stormed out. Maybe I should have listened to them. I cycled up this massive hill and found a nice spot to take a picture of my bike with the view behind it. I was out in the middle of nowhere, just me and the wild forest. I steadied the bike against a rock and stepped back when the bike moved. I blinked. The bike had been moved as if someone picked it up and wheeled it. Then it fell over. I walked over, picked it up, leaned it against the rock again, and it happened again. This time, I was really puzzled. The ground was smooth, nothing that would cause the bike to move. It was like the bike was being pushed by an invisible hand. I shook my head, took the picture, and started pushing the bike up the hill. That's when I heard it, childish giggling. At first, I thought, oh, wow, kookaburras. But wait, I'm in Ireland, not Australia, and there are no kookaburras here. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. This happened to me 5 years ago when I was living in Ireland, just outside Dublin. I was renting a small flat. It wasn't much, but it had a separate kitchen and bedroom, not one of those tiny bedsits you usually find in cities. The building was probably no older than 30 years, but I never really knew for sure. It had been designed for multiple tenants, but the flats themselves were surprisingly small. One night, I woke up suddenly around 4 a.m. The moonlight was coming in through the window, so I could see the time on my clock. It was winter, so there was no early dawn to wake me. I usually kept the drapes open since the window faced a field, and there was no one to see me, so why bother? I woke up unexpectedly, but it didn't seem like anything to worry about at first. I just lay there, thinking about the day ahead, when I began hearing something strange. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it. But after a little while, maybe a minute or two, the sound started to grow louder, and it became impossible to ignore. It was unsettling. It almost sounded like breathing. Curious, and maybe trying to convince myself that I was just spooking myself, I held my breath to see if it was my own breathing that I was hearing. But when I did that, the strange sound only became clearer, heavier, and definitely not my own. The sound seemed to be coming from the opposite corner of the room, near the door and the light switch, just a few feet off the ground. Now, I was really starting to feel uneasy. I lay there for a while longer, trying to think of a way to figure out what was causing the noise. It felt like it was seeking my attention, as strange as that sounds. It didn't move around the room, but it definitely felt like it was aware of me. I was too scared to get up and go toward the light switch, knowing I'd have to move closer to whatever was making the sound. But the thought of just lying there in the dark, helpless, pushed me to gather my courage. I got out of bed quickly, determined. I walked toward the other end of the room, as though I was ready to physically confront whatever it was. When I reached the light switch, I hesitated for only a second before flicking it on. The moment the light came on, the sound stopped. It was gone. I held my breath, listening carefully, but there was nothing. I spent the rest of the early morning hours in the living room, not daring to go back into the bedroom. Nothing ever happened again in that flat. The sound never returned. The thing is, I had heard those same breathing sounds before, in different places, at different times, and even on different continents. Sometimes they were unsettling, sometimes not. Sometimes they felt so benign that I could ignore them, even when I wasn't feeling well. Other times, though, they were more intense, and they made me feel less lonely, like some strange kind of comfort. Growing up, the house I spent most of my childhood in always made me feel uncomfortable. It wasn't the kind of fear that would keep you awake at night, but more of a constant unease that seemed to hang in the air. Over time, I've wondered if my family and I simply developed a coping mechanism to deal with the strange presence that lingered there, maybe even a sense of familiarity with it, though it was never a comfortable presence. We moved into that house when I was around 8 or 9 years old. It was a big, open space, and we spent weeks redecorating before fully settling in. Even with all the room to move around, it felt strangely suffocating, though we didn't think much of it at the time. As kids, you question everything, and at the same time, nothing at all. But there was something in that house. I can't quite explain it, but there was always the sense that we weren't the only ones there. I came to believe that at least 3 or 4 entities were present. They didn't seem threatening, but they certainly weren't friendly either. These shadowy figures, black or gray, would drift through the hall, stand in doorways, or move past when we weren't looking. Once, I even saw a tall man's figure reflected in a window, standing over me as I lay on the sofa. The main light was on in the room, but the figure looked dark and out of place. The house seemed to have its own kind of rhythm, one that wasn't tied to our activities. It felt as though things were happening on their own and moving, shifting, existing independently of us. And yet, there was always an undercurrent of something heavier, a sense of unhappiness, stress, and even a strange smugness that I couldn't quite place. For most of the 10 years we lived there, I tried to ignore it. We rarely talked about the strange happenings, mostly because we didn't want to stir anything up, I think. But there were moments when we couldn't avoid it. One of my friends, who had no idea about the things we'd experienced, once told us that she didn't want to stay the night because of the people in the hall. She'd seen the figures, too, though only out of the corner of her eye. They never fully materialized, but the quick, shadowy movements were enough to make anyone uneasy. Unfortunately for me, my bedroom seemed to be the epicenter of all the negative energy. It was as if the heaviest traffic of these presences came through there. There was a large wooden door just outside my room that led to an overgrown, disused path behind the house. For some reason, that door and the space beyond it always scared me. Even in daylight, there was something about it that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. But over time, we got used to it. It was just part of the house, and like everything else, we learned to ignore it. Next to my room was a small WC, and that room felt like the very end of the world. Even though there was plenty of light in the house, it always felt darker in that corner. It had an oppressive, suffocating feeling that made us hesitant to go near it, much less use it. The house was laid out flat, but somehow, the corner where my room was seemed to be darker. It was as if the house itself was shifting its weight, and the heaviness of it all settled into that space. I never managed to find out much about the history of the house. I know there was one family before us, and sadly, 2 of their children had passed away. But I didn't feel like their spirits were the ones haunting the place. What I do know is that the area had been used as some sort of refuge during the famine in the mid-1800s, and that always gave me a strange feeling. But even then, the presence I felt in the house seemed much more recent, almost modern in its energy. I've often thought about it over the years, what it was that made that house feel so different. I still can't quite put my finger on it, and maybe I never will. But something in that place always felt like it was hiding, like it was just waiting for us to forget about it. This story is from my mother's diary from 1973. She was 14 at the time, and it marked the 6th entry in her collection of paranormal experiences. Some parts of this story come from my own memories. It tells the tale of my grandparents on my mother's side, and their final visits to the family. Some of you might recall my earlier story about my grandfather's ghost, which involved my father's side of the family. In 1973, my grandmother passed away from ovarian cancer at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast. Her death was a heavy blow to the family, like the force of a bomb going off. She had been the one who held everyone together, described by many as the glue of the family. For my mother, who was just 14, it was a devastating loss. She had to step into the role of mother to her baby sister, who was only a year old at the time. What's particularly striking is how my mother found out about her mother's death. Back then, it was common for children to be kept in the dark about serious matters, and illness was considered something they weren't ready to hear about. So, my mother didn't know that her mother was terminally ill. On the day of her mother's death, my mother was caring for her baby sister while their father was at work. As she went about her day, she noticed something strange. An odd cold settled over the house, even though there was no wind. Then, she heard heavy footsteps, the kind that her mother's boots made as they thudded along the rough pavement outside their small council house. It was a sound my mother had grown used to, as her mother often wore those boots. Without thinking much of it, my mother went to investigate, and what she saw made her heart stop. There, walking in front of the house, was her mother, looking completely normal, with that familiar stern expression on her face, and walking in those boots. My mother was shocked, but before she could take it in, the phone rang. The sudden sound of the phone made her jump, and when she turned back to look, her mother had disappeared. As she picked up the phone, the news came: her mother had passed away. Still reeling from the shock, my mother called her Aunt Mary, her mother's sister, to tell her the heartbreaking news. I was crying so much, I could barely get the words out, my mother said. When Auntie Mary answered, I told her, "Mummy's dead." And she replied, "I know. I saw her at my kitchen window." The story doesn't end there, though. Some of it comes from my own experience. It was 2003, and I was 11 years old. My grandfather, my mother's father, was terminally ill with bowel cancer. One afternoon at school, I was told that he had quietly passed away in his sleep. I was quickly taken to the Causeway Hospital in Coleraine, where the family was gathering. As the usual funeral arrangements were being made, and after we'd all gathered our composure, we were left with the difficult task of returning home. My immediate family was all there, my parents, my brothers and their wives, my aunt and her daughter. Since we had so many people, we needed 2 cars to get back home. I was in the car with my brothers and their wives. It was in that car that something strange happened. As we drove, I saw a blurry presence sitting beside me, half inside my brother, who was fidgeting uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't see anything, but I knew what it was. It was my grandfather, sitting where he always used to sit. The apparition stayed for a short while before it vanished, leaving me with an odd sense of calm and a feeling of being honored. Meanwhile, in my mother's car, something equally strange occurred. She shared with me later what had happened. A smell appeared, one that I instantly recognized. It was TCP. Your father always smelled of it, because he used it to clean his false teeth. My cousin, Pamela, was with her at the time, and she began to panic, sensing it too. It wasn't just any smell, my mother continued. It had that cold, eerie feeling that you get when something like this happens. We all felt him, and that's when I couldn't hold back the tears. TCP was a strong antiseptic, and it was so closely associated with my grandfather that the smell brought him back to her in a way nothing else could. Even in death, it seems, the ones we love still find a way to say goodbye.
I live in Ballycastle, a quaint seaside town in Northern Ireland. My family moved here from Belfast 6 years ago, drawn by the town's breathtaking history and stunning natural beauty. The dramatic cliffs, waves crashing against rocky shores, and white mist drifting far inland made it an irresistible choice. However, as we would later discover, Ballycastle holds much more than scenic charm. It's a place steeped in the unexplained. This story comes from my mother's diary, where she has chronicled every paranormal experience she's ever had since childhood. Based on her meticulous accounts, I believe it to be accurate. It was September 1989 when my mother, father, and 2 young brothers took a casual 3-day holiday in the nearby town of Waterfoot, North Antrim. It wasn't their first trip. They often visited, and their routine included a day spent in Ballycastle. This trip seemed ordinary enough, a simple, enjoyable getaway. That is, until my mother took a solitary walk along the beach dunes toward the harbor. The harbor, as it was in 1989, no longer exists today, so I can't describe it in detail. In her diary, my mother wrote that she stood on the outermost edge of the second pier. While there, she noticed a man sitting on what she described as a big drum with a large light on it. The light flashed intermittently over the harbor. The man appeared to be fishing, his rod casting over the edge as he leaned against the drum, the bright light behind him. At first, nothing seemed unusual except for his strange attire. My mother noted in her diary that he wore a limp shirt, a dirty old jacket, ripped shorts, and a scruffy goatee beard. His clothes and demeanor struck her as odd, but nothing yet hinted at the extraordinary. As she stood watching him, the temperature abruptly dropped. A sea mist emerged seemingly out of nowhere, rolling in despite the fact it had been a warm, clear, and sunny afternoon just moments before. Intrigued but not yet alarmed, my mother decided to approach him. She smiled and greeted him with a casual hello. The man turned to face her, and she noticed something peculiar. His expression was funny, she wrote, and his bright blue eyes seemed unusually intense, almost unsettling. They were the kind of eyes that made you blink, she said. It was then that she realized he wasn't human, he was a spirit. For a moment, they locked eyes. Neither looked away as he slowly began to fade. The chill and mist lingered as the figure dissolved into nothing, leaving my mother standing alone on the pier. The encounter felt oddly serene rather than frightening, and the spirit's presence left a lasting impression on her. Afterward, my mother felt a special connection to Ballycastle. She often returned to the town, saying that the spirit seemed happy to be there in death, so I think we would be happy there in life. It was a comforting thought that shaped her view of the place. As for who this spirit was, we may never know. The pier is gone now, replaced by open sea, leaving only the memory of her encounter and the question of what or who she saw that day. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way.
Garin Tower is located just outside Carnlaw on the coast road to Larne. It's a massive mansion, built in the style of a medieval castle, a design that became popular in the late 1800s. The castle was originally owned by the Marchioness of Londonderry, Frances in Vane. After her death, it was passed down to her son, who wasn't particularly fond of the place and let it fall into disrepair. When he passed away, it went to his grandson, Winston Churchill. As the Prime Minister, he had no use for the castle, so it was donated to the British tourist industry, which turned it into a hotel. However, the hotel was destroyed in a fire, and later, the building was repurposed into the school it is today. Over its long history, the castle has witnessed many tragic events, including the deaths of several students who took their lives by jumping off the high cliffs overlooking the sea. I'm currently a student at Garin Tower, and this particular story takes place during the week of our end-of-term exams. The exam center was located in the old castle, the original structure, which now stands alongside newer school buildings. On the morning of June 9th, I was seated in the exam hall, attempting to finish my English exam. It was around 11 a.m. when something strange happened. A small, glowing globe appeared hovering over the shoulder of one of the teachers. It moved in random directions around the room, and I was the only one who could see it. At first, I thought it might have been a trick of the light, but as it approached me 3 times, I was certain it wasn't just a reflection or a watch glint. The light was spherical and not confined to any wall, so I ruled that out. I was so astounded that I didn't dare reach out to touch it, worried I'd look ridiculous and risk being disqualified from the exam. After the test was over, the globe disappeared, and I didn't see it again. Later, on June 14th, at lunchtime, I sat in the old garden of the castle with 2 friends. As we chatted, a woman walked past us with an unusual spring in her step. She wore strange, old-fashioned clothing, something like a white gown, a bonnet, and other garments I couldn't quite place. She walked right through a group of boys who were standing nearby. The boys noticed her, but they didn't see her directly, they only glanced over their shoulders, feeling her presence without understanding it. Just as quickly as she had appeared, the woman vanished. I researched any sightings of a white woman ghost at Garin Tower, but found nothing. Still, I'm certain I saw her that day. The last ghost I've encountered at Garin Tower is a well-known figure, commonly called the Black Butler. His real name was Black, and he worked as a butler for the guests of the Garin Tower Hotel in the early 1900s. When the fire broke out, he was trapped in his quarters in the tower. To escape, he jumped from the window, but sadly, he died from his injuries. There are several versions of the story, and no one knows for sure if he died from the fall or somewhere else, but his spirit is still said to haunt the school. One day, during a geography exam, our small class was sent to the drawing room, a beautiful, historic room in the old castle. I was working quietly when something caught my eye in the corner of the room. There, sitting cross-legged on a chair, was a man dressed in an old-fashioned tuxedo. His figure was blurred and distorted, but he stayed there for about 5 minutes, during which I stared at him, unable to look away. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he faded into nothing. As the figure faded, a sudden coldness swept through the room. It was a hot summer day, so the chill was noticeable to everyone. The other students and teachers looked around in confusion, and that's when the apparition vanished completely. From the style of his clothing, I was certain it was the Black Butler. This story has 2 parts, both of which are deeply connected to the loss of my boyfriend, Jim, and the strange and comforting experiences I've had since. The first part took place shortly after his death, in New York City. I was devastated when he passed, of course. Jim was to be buried in his home country, Ireland, but on the day of his funeral, a memorial mass was held for him at his parish in Queens. Jim had always loved hearing me sing. I used to sing around the city, and it was something we both cherished. So, on a whim, I decided to volunteer to sing at his memorial, Massachusetts. I chose the Pai Jesu from Gabriel Fauré Requiem, a piece that felt both sacred and personal. That morning, I tried to warm up my voice in my apartment. But every time I reached the words, Dona Eis Requiem, I broke down in tears. I couldn't imagine how I was going to sing this piece without falling apart. The thought of standing before the congregation, overwhelmed by grief, seemed impossible. But by the time the Mass started, it was too late to back out. I was scheduled to sing during communion, and I had to find a way to do it. I kept praying, asking for help. Please help me get through this. Don't let me let Jim down. Then, it was time. I stood at the altar, next to the organ, and nodded to the organist. He began the sustained chord that opened the piece. I started to sing, and in that moment, something extraordinary happened. As I sang, I felt a presence beside me, like someone was there, urging me on. It was a quiet, comforting feeling, as though I wasn't alone in that moment. You can do this for Jim, the presence seemed to say. With that support, I made it through the piece without breaking down. When I finished, I walked off the altar, my legs shaking, and collapsed into the nearest pew. Finally, the tears I had been holding back poured out. Now, fast forward to just a couple of weeks ago. I was touring Ireland with a friend, and of course, we made a stop at the graveyard where Jim is buried. I had visited his grave before, but this time was different. I knelt beside it, said a prayer, and yes, I shed some more tears. Even after all this time, I still miss him deeply. Once I got back into the car, we continued on our way. We had found a nice classical music station on the radio, and my friend, who was driving, put it on to help pass the time. A few tracks in, the unmistakable opening notes of Pai Jesu began to play. I gasped when I heard it. My friend, who had been with me at Jim's memorial mass, looked at me with wide eyes. I don't think that's a coincidence, she said. They don't play pieces like that very often on the radio. I think this is Jim's way of telling you he knows you visited his grave today. Tears welled up in my eyes again, but this time, they were different. I felt a strange sense of peace, like Jim was somehow still with me, acknowledging my visit in his own way. It felt like a sign, a reminder that he knew I was thinking of him, and that he was still watching over me. I've thought about that moment many times since. It felt as though Jim's spirit had found a way to reach me, to let me know that even in death, he was still present in some form, still part of my life. I couldn't help but feel comforted by the thought that his grave was warmer, sweeter, because I had remembered him with an Ave. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. His story comes from a collection of memories shared by my mother and some of my own experiences. All of them were recorded right after they happened, so I can say with confidence that they're accurate. It begins with the history of a house we once lived in on Divis Drive, in Belfast, Northern Ireland. The house is now 94 years old. It was built by a small construction company that went bankrupt shortly after completing the house. At the time, no one had purchased it, so my grandfather's friend bought it for a tiny sum. In fact, my grandfather acquired the property from his friend after winning a bet. Then came the violent period known as the Troubles in Ireland. It was during this time that a sniper took my grandfather's life while he was sitting on the front porch, smoking his pipe. That was a tragic and defining moment in the house's history, though nothing particularly remarkable happened after that, at least, not until much later. My story begins with my mother's memories from when she and her husband moved into the house in the 1970s. The move was gradual for many reasons I won't go into, but it wasn't long after they settled and that strange things started to happen. One evening, my grandmother came over for dinner, and they were all chatting away, enjoying a nice meal together. But then, my mother smelled pipe smoke. Back then, pipe smoking was common, and the smell was unmistakable. She asked, "Who's smoking a pipe?" But no one else could smell it. Thinking it was just her imagination, my mother tried to ignore it, but the smell only grew stronger. The acrid, thick smoke filled the hallway, so strong that my mother started to cough and gag. She went to investigate but found no one there. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She kept seeing flashes of something, a quick movement near the door, but whenever she tried to focus on it, it would disappear. This experience wasn't a one-off for her. Over the next 30 years, similar things happened again and again. She could never explain it, but the details were always the same. Then there's my brother's story. He was only 8 at the time, and my mother recorded his account as soon as he told it. He had been sleeping on the top bunk of his bed. Now, my brother had a habit of rolling off the top bunk and landing on the bottom one, which was wider. He wasn't hurt, but it often startled him. Most of the time, he'd just climb back up and go back to sleep, but this time was different. When he fell, he heard footsteps. They were coming from downstairs, slow but deliberate, and getting louder as they climbed the stairs. My brother waited for whoever it was to reach the top, but no one appeared. The footsteps continued, but they didn't have a shape. They were sharp, echoing on the wooden floors, followed by strange mutterings, grunts and indecipherable sounds. Then, everything went quiet. Terrified, my brother ran to tell my mother. And then there's my own memory. My mother was always sensitive to the spirit, but for some reason, I never was, not even once in all the years we lived in that house. I could sense spirits anywhere, but not in my own home. It wasn't until the day we moved out that I had my own encounter. We had packed up everything, preparing to leave the house for good. Just as we were about to walk out the door, my mother turned around and spoke to what looked like thin air. I remember exactly what she said, "We're going now and won't be back. Would you like to come with us?" I didn't understand it at the time, but it struck me as odd. And then, almost immediately, a powerful smell of pipe smoke filled the hallway, followed by an intense coldness. The lights flickered briefly, and then the sensation was gone. My mother didn't say anything, but I could tell she understood what had just happened. We left the house quietly, and we never returned. I've always wondered if the spirit was my grandfather. After all, he was the one who smoked a pipe and often stood on the porch where he was shot. Perhaps he was still lingering there, in the house he had won in a bet. As we moved on, the spirit stayed behind, choosing not to follow us. It remained in the house, its home, long after we had gone. 3 years later, we met the new owners of the house. We asked them casually if anything strange had happened since they moved in, and they replied with a simple, no. They had never experienced anything unusual. On May 11, 1971, my mother was staying at her aunt's house in County Sligo, Ireland. It was her birthday, but rather than celebrating in a typical way, she was with her toddler sister at a house steeped in local history and, as she would soon discover, paranormal activity. The house was located on the Lissadell estate, once owned by the Gorbooth family. The area was haunted by the spirits of those who had died during the Irish famine, when most of the local tenants perished from starvation. The house where my mother stayed had once been the home of a tenant farming family, who tragically lost all 5 of their children to famine. The parents, unable to cope with their loss, eventually emigrated to America. Another common tale about the house involves an English aristocrat who, for some unknown reason, visited the estate. He died suddenly in the kitchen, presumably from heart failure. No one quite understood why an aristocrat would visit a tenant farmer's home, but the story persisted. With these 2 stories in mind, I'll begin the tale of that night. After a small birthday celebration, my mother and her sister were sent to bed. They were to sleep in a room that would later be known as the cold room. The room was sparsely decorated, just faded pink wallpaper and a picture on the wall, which gave the unsettling feeling that its eyes followed you as you walked past. My mother and her sister shared a double bed. Her younger sister, being so small, fell asleep quickly, but my mother stayed awake, her mind racing with thoughts of the house's dark past. Eventually, she drifted into a light sleep. It was then that she was awakened by the sound of footsteps. Soft but steady, they echoed in the room, the rhythm unmistakable. My mother knew immediately that the footsteps belonged to someone wearing boots. She assumed it was her aunt, who always wore boots. Not wanting to get into trouble for being awake, my mother closed her eyes, pretending to sleep. But then, an odd coldness filled the air, much colder than the room should have been. She heard whispers, voices she couldn't make out, and she realized the voice wasn't her aunt's, it was a woman's voice. The whispers grew louder, and then my mother distinctly heard the sound of a kiss placed on her sleeping sister's forehead. My mother was gripped with terror, feeling nauseous, but she remained still, too scared to move. The footsteps then turned and left, fading away with the same rhythmic thud, just as they had come. After a long moment of silence, my mother woke her sister. She asked her if she had felt or seen anything unusual. But her sister said no, she hadn't felt a thing. The same sequence of events happened twice more that night. The third time, however, my mother gathered the courage to look at the figure. What she saw was a shadowy, blurred form, but it was still very much human-shaped. She could feel the cold radiating from it. The figure moved toward her sister, kissed her gently on the forehead again, and then walked out of the room with long strides. The next morning, my mother asked her aunt if she had entered the room that night. Her aunt swore on the Bible that she had not. To her, swearing on the Bible was a serious matter, and my mother could tell that her aunt was truthful. After that night, my mother never had to sleep in that room again. Over the years, she never encountered the motherly ghost again, but she was left with the lingering sense that something was watching over her sister. Fast forward 39 years, when my mother and I visited the house again. It had been extensively refurbished with new extensions added, but the room itself was unchanged. Although the room looked different, it still held a strange, sinister atmosphere. It was cold and dark, despite the bright summer sun streaming in through the windows. My cousin, who now owned the house, told us, no matter what we do, the room never heats up. I was deeply impressed by this, especially since I had the chance to see the place for myself years after my mother's experience. It was easy to understand why the house felt so haunted, and it seemed like the perfect setting for a haunting to take place. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. It was a summer like no other, filled with strange events and the looming sense that something was about to change, something I couldn't fully grasp yet. I had just finished primary school and was preparing to step into the world of secondary school. By that time, I had already encountered the supernatural twice, which sparked an obsession with learning more about ghosts. This led me to start a club, the Ghost Club/Beastly Remains, where the only members were myself and my best friend, Jonathan O'Reilly, who, tragically, is no longer with us. This story, however, is the turning point, the moment everything shifted for us. It marks the beginning of something far too intense for two young kids, and I've been carrying it with me ever since. That day, though I can't remember the exact date, felt as if it would never end. After breakfast, John and I went about our usual business, collecting clues for a case we were working on. It all started a year before, and had we had access to the internet, we might have solved it in a matter of hours. But life never works that simply, does it? I won't go into the details of that case now, maybe another time, but while we were out hunting for evidence, we came across something truly disturbing. A crow, dead on its back with its wings splayed out, a cross impaled through the middle of its chest. It wasn't related to our investigation, but it was an omen. Something about it made the air feel thick, like a warning. The image stuck with me, heavy and ominous, and it lingered in the back of my mind as the day wore on. We eventually made our way back to John's house, heading to the backyard where his mother's shed had become our makeshift clubhouse. We started going over the things we had found, but nothing connected or made sense. Frustrated by yet another dead end, I threw our findings onto the ground and slumped into an armchair we'd rescued from a skip a few days earlier. John, ever the optimist, suggested we take a walk, no searching, just walking to clear our heads. The weather wasn't great, a little overcast, but the sun peeked through here and there, so we decided to go. John was always curious about the things I could see. He'd often ask how it felt, what they looked like. He was fascinated by the idea of ghosts, especially the darker ones, the ones I had encountered before. He didn't understand why I called them evil, but I had no answer. You know how there are good and bad people? I would say. Well, why wouldn't there be good and bad ghosts? As we walked, I suddenly felt something shift in the air. It was hard to describe, but it was suffocating. Heat, unbearable heat. It felt like the air itself was too thick to breathe. I began to choke on emptiness, unable to draw in a breath. It was like being smothered by nothingness. And then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. Are you okay? John's voice was laced with panic. He was standing beside me, eyes wide with fear. Apparently, I had started shaking and screaming. I didn't remember any of it. My throat felt raw, like I'd inhaled fire, and the world around me felt off. I took in my surroundings, nothing looked unusual. We were standing in the middle of a small and used road, with the Martin Savage factory to my left. A tall, metal fence bordered the property, topped with spiked guardians. Ahead of us was a disused cottage, its front door boarded up, and the windows covered in grime and wood. It looked abandoned, like something out of a forgotten time. "Come on, sit down," John urged. I nodded, trying to steady my breath. My throat was still dry, scorched by whatever had just happened. "I'm okay," I managed to say, though I wasn't entirely sure. John, ever the brave one, suggested we check out the cottage. "Could be fun," he said, though I think he just wanted to get away from the strange feeling that had gripped me. I agreed, not in the mood for any more surprises but willing to go along with whatever might ease the tension. We walked toward the cottage, each step making the air feel heavier. It was a typical old cottage, but something about it felt wrong. Its front door was nailed shut, and the windows were stained, their glass clouded and boarded over. "Come on, there may be a way in over the other side," I said, trying to push past my unease. We had already reached the old cottage, and after a few moments of scanning the place, I had found my way around the side. Using the factory fence as support, I scaled the wall with relative ease. John, eager as ever to follow, climbed after me. When I reached the roof, I glanced over and saw a small window just slightly ajar. Carefully, I let myself slide over the edge. I didn't want to fall into the nettles below or risk hurting myself. Once safely on the ground, I pushed the window open enough for us both to slip inside. The inside of the cottage was far stranger than I had anticipated. The room we were in had no real floor, just a series of wooden planks arranged precariously, gaps between them wide enough to swallow a foot. The ceiling above us was solid enough, but there was no real floor to walk on, which made every step treacherous. The other room had a fireplace, some windows, and an empty front door, but little else. John and I stumbled around for a while, poking through the place and trying to make sense of what we were doing there. I leaned over into the fireplace to get a better look up the chimney. Predictably, it was dark and filled with soot. "Hey Rob, look at this!" John called out from across the room, his voice filled with an odd mix of excitement and fear. I walked over to where he was standing. My stomach dropped. There, in the middle of the dusty floor, was a small footprint. It was incredibly clear, so much so that you could count the toes. And it was smeared with blood. "Do you think someone was killed?" I whispered, a chill running through me. John, already looking pale, didn't answer at first. His face was frozen in shock. Finally, he spoke in a voice that trembled. "It actually just appeared in front of me." "What?" I asked, incredulous. John explained that while waiting for me to come out of the fireplace, the footprint had just manifested right in front of him. The blood, however, had a different explanation. When we had first entered the room, John had noticed a trail of blood dripping down from the top of the window beside the front door. Thinking it might be rust, he had touched it. That's when the footprint had materialized. "Lift me up, I want to see where the blood's coming from," I said, trying to make sense of it all. John agreed, and I helped him climb up so he could look into the attic. The moment his eyes went up there, though, he froze. Without warning, he dropped down and sprinted for the window, his face ashen. I followed him without hesitation. The panic was too real. We both scrambled for the front door, but before we could escape, I heard footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps from the room above us. They were moving, slow and deliberate, crossing the ceiling. They were coming for us. I kicked the door open, feeling a sharp scrape across my back as I flung myself out onto the road. The moment I was outside, everything changed. The same suffocating heat from earlier returned, but this time I could see it. A vision in flames, swirling around me. People in panic, scrambling. Then, somehow, I was screaming at them, trying to help, but the words didn't come out. It was over as quickly as it had started, and I was back outside, standing in the middle of the deserted road. I looked up and waited for John, but he didn't appear. Minutes dragged by, but he didn't show up. It felt like hours. Then, I heard it, the blood-curdling scream. A sound I'll never forget, echoing from inside the house. John finally appeared, but he didn't climb down the roof as he had earlier. He fell, crashing onto the ground with a sickening crunch. I rushed over to him, my heart pounding. He was pale, his eyes unfocused, staring straight through me. "John! What happened? Are you okay?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. He didn't respond at first. When he finally did, his voice was distant, hollow. "Grandpa. I need Grandpa." Without questioning further, I helped him to his feet and rushed him to his grandfather's house. The whole way there, John didn't say a word. His color was returning, but the shock was still there, deep in his eyes. When we reached his grandfather's house, I knocked urgently on the door. It opened, and John was immediately ushered inside, sitting down at the kitchen table. His grandfather didn't waste any time asking what was wrong. I explained everything, the strange events, the visions, the blood, and when I finished, the old man looked at me, his face unreadable. Then, to my shock, he raised his hand as if to strike John. I jumped in between them, terrified. "What's going on? Why is he acting like this? What did he see?" John's grandfather, with a deep sigh, lowered his hand and began to speak. "About 65 or 70 years ago, I lived in that house with my sister, my mother, and father," he began, his voice heavy with memory. "My sister was 16. She had just gotten a beautiful new dress, and she was dancing around, admiring it. But the tail of the dress caught fire. She went up in flames so quickly, there was nothing anyone could do. She died. That's what John saw. That's the vision you had." The story hit me like a freight train. The fire, the vision of the panic, the people screaming, all of it was connected to John's family history. John, still dazed, didn't speak much after that. All he could say was, "It's not finished, Rob." Hours later, we left his grandfather's house, but something between us had changed. I don't know if it was the horror of the day, or the weight of everything we'd experienced, but we were both quieter, more distant. John never spoke about the events again. It was as though he had sealed it away in his mind, locked it up where I couldn't reach. The strange part, though, came after. That night, after everything settled, John insisted we go back to the house. I didn't want to. It seemed insane to go back, but he insisted. When we arrived, he told me to wait outside. "Stay here, please," he said, his voice urgent. I didn't argue. I stood in the middle of the pitch-black road, the air heavy around me, waiting. It felt like an eternity. As I stood there, I began to hear something, hoofbeats, the sound of a carriage approaching. But there was nothing in sight. I looked around, but the road was empty. The sound grew louder, closer. My heart raced. And then, I saw it. 6 black horses, pulling a black carriage. And in the driver's seat, a rider with no head. I recognized it immediately, the Kochtabauer, the death coach. I was frozen in place, knowing what it meant. As I took a step forward, something strange happened. A girl slipped past me and climbed into the coach. I was stunned. She wasn't supposed to be there. The coach only came for those it was meant to take. I realized, with a shock, that I wasn't the one being claimed. I was just a witness. I wasn't the one its driver was coming for. The scene shifted in an instant, and the carriage disappeared, leaving only John. He looked at me, his expression knowing. "Let's go," he said. We turned and left, not looking back. Later, I asked John what he had seen. He didn't mention the girl, but he did tell me something I'll never forget. He said that as he walked back to the house, he saw a bright white light around me, and he couldn't take his eyes off it. He said it was the only thing he could focus on. He had no idea, but the white light was my aura, my energy. I was somehow untouched by Death's servant. After that day, John and I grew apart. We went to different schools and drifted into separate lives. But we stayed in touch, even after his passing. The bond we shared was unbreakable, but there was always a distance between us that neither of us could cross. I believe that the Kashtabauer will return one day, but not for me. It's coming for John. I'm sure of it. So, I live each day knowing the end will come for him, but not for me, not yet. I take comfort in the knowledge that I'm still here. The house is still there, empty, abandoned. I visit it sometimes. I walk down that old and used road, remembering the day John and I shared, the vision we saw, the horrors we witnessed. Sometimes, I feel his presence beside me, walking with me. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I've had my share of strange experiences, some that have left me shaken, and others that felt almost miraculous. But I've learned over the years that not everything in life is meant to scare you, some things are meant to save you. This story, though, is about how the Irish language saved my life when I was just 15. I've never forgotten that moment or the kind words that helped me. You might know them, too, but let me tell the story first. It was a hot August afternoon when my friend Paul and I finished a long game of football in Phoenix Park. We were both drained, so we plopped down on his front lawn, gulping down water to hydrate, our muscles already aching from the intense game. I stretched out flat on my back, eyes drifting up to the sky, well, the heavens, as I like to think of it now. I had a cigarette between my lips, and I took a long, slow pull, watching the smoke curl up and float away. Then, I heard something strange. It wasn't the word itself, it was the language. Irish. Now, you should know that very few people in Ireland still speak Irish regularly, only about 1% of the population does. But there it was, clear as day, Gabim o Lythseal, excuse me. I froze for a second, unsure if I had heard correctly. A voice from the garden gate caught my attention. An elderly man stood there, looking at me with a curious expression. I quickly responded, "See, yes." I propped myself up on my elbows, glancing over at Paul, who seemed as confused as I was. "Who are you talking to?" Paul asked, clearly puzzled. I hadn't even noticed that he was still there beside me. Normally, I wouldn't have answered a ghost without first checking to see if anyone else was around, but this time, it felt right. I had to respond. I turned back to the old man and asked, "Kona's at it too, how are you?" He smiled warmly and replied, "Tame go maith, go ride maith agate, I'm fine, thank you." Paul stared at me like I had lost my mind. But I couldn't stop talking to the man. It just felt like something I had to do, though I couldn't explain why. The man took a step closer, then asked, "Santiame? Ledoux Foyle, what's the time, please?" I glanced at my watch and was about to tell him when suddenly, he was right in front of me, shouting, "Be Kiramak, look out!" I jumped, startled, but then he said something else. "Dia is Moirdut, may God and Mary be with you." It wasn't the shouting that shocked me, but the greeting. Dia is Moirdut is a kind of blessing you give to someone who's already greeted you, and it carried a tone of warning. It felt like he was trying to tell me something important, though I didn't quite understand what. And just as quickly as he appeared, he was gone. I sat there for a few moments, still processing everything that had happened, before getting up and heading inside Paul's house for dinner. It left me a bit shaken but also strangely comforted. I explained the encounter to Paul, but he just shrugged it off, as anyone would, thinking I was probably just imagining things. But he believes me now, even if he doesn't fully understand. It's easier for some to think the world is flat than to believe in the unexplained. Later that evening, I left Paul's house around 10 o'clock and began my long walk home. His place was on Black Horse Avenue, about a 40-minute walk from my house in Cabra. I decided to cut through the park and take a longer route through the Dunnard estate. As I walked, I started to hear something moving beside me. The park is home to foxes, deer, rabbits, and badgers, so I didn't think much of it. But then I heard a clicking sound coming from my left, sharp and out of place. I stopped dead in my tracks, turning to face the noise. The air felt different now, colder, quieter, as if everything else around me had gone silent. And then I saw it. The shape was hard to make out at first, but it was there, dark, hunched over, about 4 feet tall with its arms dragging on the ground. It didn't move like any animal I knew. I froze. I didn't know what to do. There was no sound, just this eerie silence, broken only by that odd clicking noise. My heart raced, and fear settled in my chest. I was trapped. And then, just like that, I heard it again, "Dia is moyer dut." It was the old man's voice. I remembered his warning, "Look out." But what did it mean? What was I supposed to do? In a panic, I muttered, "Oh God, help me." The creature seemed to pause for a moment. And then, it began to move toward me again, slowly, over the leaves and branches, its shape becoming clearer with every step. I won't describe it in full, but imagine your worst nightmare, and multiply it by 50, that's what it looked like. My breath quickened. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I felt frozen in place. In that moment, I closed my eyes, preparing for the worst. I whispered the Arnathair, the Our Father, in Irish, my voice shaking but determined. When I opened my eyes again, everything had changed. The creature was gone. The space in front of me was empty. It was like the world had shifted. For a moment, I stood there, unsure if it had all been a dream. But then, I heard the old man's voice again, "Go Hanam Hathayar Fad, well done." It was him. I couldn't see him, but I felt the warmth of his presence. I didn't know how to explain it, but I knew he had helped me. I made my way home that night, feeling a strange peace wash over me. I've never forgotten that experience, just like I haven't forgotten any of the others. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.
People often say that 13 is an unlucky number, but for me, it's 8. I was 8 years old when I made my first real best friend. I was the undefeated champion of every squares game, a popular Irish game, though I won't go into the rules here, feel free to ask if you're curious. Life felt perfect. I was living in the moment, and my best friend, Stephen, had invited me to stay at his house for 2 nights. The timing couldn't have been better. My parents were off to a Neil Diamond concert in the UK, leaving me with plenty of time to hang out at Stephen's place. His house was down by the Grange Gorman, which was near a mental hospital. That idea unnerved me a little. I remember asking his parents if the patients ever escaped. They reassured me that they didn't. And when I asked how they could be so sure, they simply replied, "We work there." It was a simple enough answer, and it settled my nerves. Little did I know, my nightmare had already begun to unfold around me. The first night was just like any other sleepover. We ate popcorn, talked about video games, the Commodore 64 was our main console at the time, wrestled each other, and drank way too much Sedona and Coke, probably more than our little bodies could handle. When Stephen went to the bathroom, I kept playing my game, holding on for dear life, trying not to let the effects of the soda catch up to me. That's when I heard it, the footsteps behind me. I spun around, expecting to see Stephen, but the space behind me was empty. The steps stopped. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I didn't know that the old floorboards warped and creaked, and I was standing right where they did. If I had known, maybe I wouldn't have been so frightened. The bathroom door opened, spilling light into the hallway, and the sound of the flushing toilet echoed down the stairs. Stephen came out and asked if I was okay. I didn't answer him right away. I was still trying to figure out if what I thought I saw, a shadow, darker than the pitch-black hallway, was real. I shrugged it off and distracted myself with my game. But nature was calling, and I quickly remembered why I hadn't answered him. Nothing else happened that night. The second night started the same way, though we didn't eat as much popcorn or drink as much soda. The Commodore 64 was still going strong. Around midnight, I started feeling hungry. I asked Stephen if I could go grab a snack from the kitchen, and he said it was fine. Want anything? I asked him. No, I'm good, he replied. I slipped into the hall, trying to be quiet so I wouldn't wake anyone. As I walked down the stairs, the house felt still, too still. When I reached the kitchen, I opened the door, and the cool moonlight poured in through the window, casting everything in an eerie silver glow. The black and white tiles on the floor gleamed in the dim light, and at the center of it all stood my target, the fridge. I walked over, shivering from the cold tiles beneath my feet, and opened the fridge door. The light inside blinded me for a moment. I blinked, waiting for my eyes to adjust. When they finally did, I heard the kitchen door slowly close behind me. I turned to look, but I couldn't see anything. The moonlight seemed to vanish, and the room felt darker than before. That's when I heard it. Rob! It was Stephen's voice, echoing from upstairs. "Rob," he called again. But I couldn't answer. My throat felt dry with fear. The images from the night before flooded my mind, particularly the shadow, darker than the darkness around me. "Rob!" Stephen again, louder this time. Then I heard something else. A whisper, barely audible, but chilling nonetheless. "Rob," it wasn't Stephen's voice. I froze. "Hey, Rob!" The voice mocked me. My heart raced, my vision blurred with tears, and I could feel my body trembling. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The coldness of the room surrounded me, and then, just like that, everything changed. A cold hand gripped my shoulder tightly. I spun around, terrified, and found myself face to face with a man I didn't recognize. His smile was wide, too wide. His eyes were dark, hollow, and unblinking. He leaned in closer, his breath cold against my ear, and then whispered something I couldn't quite hear. I could feel his face moving around mine, closer and closer. His smile never left. And just like that, it was over. I don't remember how I managed to leave the kitchen, but I did. I ran out of the house as fast as my legs could carry me and went straight to my grandparents' house, just a few minutes walk away in Cabra. I never spoke to Stephen about what happened that night, but I'm sure he felt something too. His family had to move out of that house soon after because of similar experiences. They heard voices calling their names, things they couldn't explain. They eventually moved across the street, where they now live happily. But the house on Grange Gorman remains empty, abandoned by anyone who dares to live there.
When I was young, my aunt, who was the one to first introduce me to the world of the paranormal, always told me that I had a gift. She believed I had a sensitivity to things others couldn't see. My parents had built the house we lived in while my mother was pregnant with me. Before that, there was an old house on the land, but it was torn down to make way for a safer, new home. My parents had lived in the old house for a while before I was born, but things took a strange turn once I came home from the hospital. My mother would often tell me that the TV would turn on and off by itself, and at night, they would hear the sounds of a baby crying. They would rush to check on me, but I was always sound asleep. This happened for a few years, and it wasn't until one day, when I was talking to my mother, that I casually mentioned something that would make her realize there was more going on than she had thought. I told her about my new friend, a girl I had been playing with. At first, she didn't think much of it. She assumed I had an imaginary friend, as many young children do. But it kept happening. She would hear me talking to someone and would come down to check, only to find that no one was there. I was always playing by myself, or so it seemed. Over time, the strange events began to feel like a part of our lives, something that we couldn't explain. One day, we had a family friend over for tea. We'll call her Mary. I was playing in the living room when I mentioned my friend again. This time, I said her name, Sarah. I remember Mary freezing. She looked at me, her face pale, and asked me, "Who is Sarah?" Without thinking, I told her, "She's the girl in the white dress with long blonde hair." Mary's face changed. She didn't say anything at first, but I could tell she was shaken. She explained to my mother later that in the old house, a family had once lived there. They had a young daughter, a little girl named Sarah, who tragically died just before her first Holy Communion. The most unsettling part was that Sarah's body had been laid out where our sitting room was now. She had been dressed in a white dress, her long blonde hair flowing down her back. That story chilled my mother to the core. She took me to a local man, a faith healer, and asked if he could stop whatever was happening to me. She wanted to protect me, at least until I was old enough to understand. But honestly, I don't think I'll ever fully understand what happened. Desperate to help, my parents had a mass said in the house, hoping it would help the spirits find peace and move on. After the mass, my mother and her sister went upstairs to the bathroom together, too frightened to go alone. When they opened the door, they both froze. Standing there in the hallway was an old woman, waving at them. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished. My mother and her sister were too shaken to speak about it much after that, but it's a memory that has stayed with them. They never knew who the old lady was, but they both hoped that, wherever she was, she had found a better place. Every morning, the school bus picked me up at the side road that led to my aunt's house, and every afternoon, it dropped me off there again. So, twice a day, I would pass by the entrance to that strange, mysterious road. It wasn't much of a road anymore. It was overgrown with weeds and blackberry bushes, and the trees on both sides grew so thick that their branches met above, making it dark and shadowy, even on bright, sunny days. The bus driver once pointed it out to me. "People who go down that road after dark," he said, "well, they usually don't come back. There's a haunted house about a quarter of a mile down there." He paused for a moment. "But you should know about that, Alex. It used to be your grandfather's house." I already knew about it. It was now my Aunt Mary's house, but she would never talk about it. She always said the stories were just silly rumors. She didn't believe in ghosts. She used to say, if only the villagers weren't so superstitious, she could buy me better clothes. But even though she didn't believe in ghosts, I couldn't ignore what had happened to the families who had tried to live there. Aunt Mary had rented the house out 3 times, but each family had moved out within a week, saying things in the house were just too strange. No one would stay in it anymore. I thought about that house a lot. I wondered if there was a way to prove there was no ghost. One Saturday, when my aunt went to the village, I decided to find out. I took the key to the house off the hook in the kitchen and set out. When I stepped inside, I realized it was probably the bravest thing I had ever done. As soon as I entered, the door slammed shut behind me. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. That's when I saw it, the ghost. It looked exactly like you'd expect, a tall, faint white figure, floating down the stairs toward me. I screamed, yanked the door open, and ran down the steps as fast as I could. I never went back inside again. In the end, my aunt and the villagers decided to burn the house down. It was left to burn completely, never to be touched again. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I'm 26 now, but this happened on the night of my 20th birthday at Castle Leslie in Glaslaw, County Monaghan, Ireland. At the time, the castle was a small hotel with, I think, 8 rooms. Each room had a different theme, and our room for the night was called the nursery. It was on the top, 3rd floor, and had a beautiful bay window that overlooked a small lake. The room itself was lovely, and the bathroom was designed to look like a big dollhouse. What made Castle Leslie different from most other hotels was that guests had free access to the whole castle and its grounds. You only saw or spoke to the staff when you needed something, and there were telephones throughout the castle for that purpose. It was the night of my 20th birthday, and my mom and I had just enjoyed a wonderful dinner. She went to bed early, but I was still too excited to sleep. I wanted to explore the castle some more. Earlier, I'd bought a Cuban cigar, which was a big deal for me because I'm American, and Cuba is under a trade embargo, and I wanted to smoke it in the drawing room, which was the only room where smoking was allowed. By this time, the staff had already turned off all the lights and gone to bed in their own quarters, leaving the castle completely dark. I had to navigate the confusing hallways and staircases by memory, turning on lights as I went from the third floor to the first. Halfway down the stairs, I stopped to call the staff and ask if they could turn off the motion alarm so I could smoke. They told me the alarm hadn't been set, so I was free to go. I continued down the hall, turning on lights as I went. When I reached the drawing room, the staff had closed the shutters and doors, and it was pitch black inside. I opened the door and felt along the wall until I found the light switch. I flicked it on, just enough to see clearly. The room was huge and furnished with things like an old black grand piano, comfortable couches, tables for reading, and various antiques. I sat in a chair with my back to the wall, facing the fireplace, and lit up my cigar. As I sat there, I casually glanced at the fireplace and noticed a flickering light in the glass. It looked like a reflection. Curious, I got up and walked around to see where the light was coming from. To my surprise, I found a small white candle in a brass holder, flickering on top of the piano. The candle had only just been lit, there were no wax strips, and the room had been completely dark when I entered. The staff would never have left a candle burning unattended in a room full of old wooden curtains. I blew the candle out and returned to my chair to finish my cigar. The experience didn't scare me at all. In fact, it felt comforting. It made me smile. Castle Leslie is known to be haunted, and one of its past residents, a young man named Shane Leslie, is said to still appear sometimes on the shores of the lake. He died in a war far from home. There were 10 of us in our family, 5 girls, 3 boys, and our parents. 4 girls came first, followed by 1 boy, then me, and my 2 younger brothers. William, the second youngest, was born in 1980, 3 months premature. My mother had a fall that triggered early labor. For the next 4 months, William fought for his life in intensive care. It was a tough time for my parents. They tried to spend as much time as they could with him while also taking care of the 6 other children. When William finally pulled through, the doctors told my parents they shouldn't try for any more children. They said my mother wouldn't be able to carry another pregnancy to term and recommended she be sterilized. My parents reluctantly agreed, and the procedure was scheduled. However, when my mother went in for the procedure, they had to run a pregnancy test, just to be sure. To everyone's surprise, it came back positive. Abortion wasn't an option in Ireland at the time, so my mother had to continue the pregnancy. She went private. My father worked as much overtime as he could to afford the best care for her. It was considered a high-risk pregnancy, especially after William's premature birth and my mother's age. She was 36, which back then was considered old for having a baby. The pregnancy was difficult, and my mother had a constant worry that she might lose the baby. But when my youngest brother was born healthy, my parents were overjoyed. As a result, my mother became very protective of him. She saw him as the child she almost didn't have, and she absolutely adored him. He was only 8 when my mother died in 1990. I don't think he fully understood what had happened. As he grew older, he would cry whenever we talked about her. He missed her terribly. When I was about 15, I started having dreams about my mother. It was always the same dream. She'd be sitting at the kitchen table with my youngest brother, surrounded by a huge pile of sweets. She was helping him count them out, and no one else was allowed to have any. She wouldn't talk to anyone else, only whispering to him. This dream went on for a couple of years, until I turned 17, and then it changed completely. One night, I dreamed my mother was standing in our kitchen, wearing the green dress and large white hat she had worn to her brother's wedding, years before she died. I kept asking her why she was there, but she didn't answer. She just smiled and told me she was waiting for someone, and that she would be leaving soon. After a few minutes, she disappeared, and the dream ended. The next afternoon, my youngest brother died. He was 15, and it happened the day before the 7th anniversary of my mother's death. I believe my mother had been trying to warn me all along that she was going to take her baby boy back. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The story I'm about to tell happened in November 2005. It was just a normal Friday night. I had plans to meet some friends the next day, so I stayed home, watching TV and relaxing. Around midnight, I decided to go to bed. It was just my father and me at home that evening. Since he had gone to bed earlier, it was my responsibility to turn off the lights and lock up the house. On my way to bed, I passed the holy water font and blessed myself, as I did every night. At this point, I should mention that I'm a practicing Catholic. My faith is important to me, though I don't often show it publicly. It's something between Jesus and me. Once in bed, I reached for a book to read. As I was about to pick one, a small booklet on the Holy Rosary caught my eye. The week before, I had been hearing a lot about the graces offered by Our Blessed Lady for reciting the Rosary. Though I had always considered the Rosary a bit long and confusing as a child, something made me feel that I needed to pray it. During Saturday evening Mass, I had mentally said to Jesus, "If you want me to say it, just give me a sign." I didn't think much of it afterward. However, after Mass, while waiting for my grandmother who was receiving confessions, I noticed a step-by-step guide on how to say the Rosary, resting next to a statue of Our Lady. I had been going to that church for 24 years, and I had never seen that leaflet before. I took it home and, that night, said the Rosary for the souls in purgatory. However, my good intentions soon faded, and I didn't pray the Rosary much after that. That Friday night, I saw the booklet again and decided to try praying the Rosary once more. I took my rosary beads and began praying. Before I knew it, I had fallen asleep. I was awoken by the sound of the doorbell ringing repeatedly at 4:45 a.m. When I opened the door, it was my older sister, who had been out at her work Christmas party. She had lost her key and was a little tipsy. I helped her to bed as she chatted about office gossip. Not wanting to wake my father, I told her we would talk more in the morning. I was wide awake now, so I went back to my room. I switched on my stereo to a low volume, turned off the light, and climbed back into bed, looking forward to a peaceful sleep. As I lay there, I heard a song from the previous summer playing softly in the background. I was thinking about how strange it was that such a cheesy song had become so popular when suddenly, I heard the most terrifying sound of my life. From the darkness, just inches from my face, came the most horrendous growling I've ever heard. It was so loud I thought for sure my father or sister would come rushing in. My heart was pounding, and my eyes were shut tight in fear. I couldn't see anything, but in my mind, I imagined a snarling, evil dog standing over me. It felt like pure evil had entered my room, like the darkness itself was swallowing me. I immediately began praying out loud, reciting the Our Father and blessing myself over and over again. I'm not sure when the growling stopped, but it was likely when I blessed myself. What I do know is that I quickly turned on the light, and from that point on, I prayed until I eventually fell asleep with the light on. I want to make it clear that I wasn't dreaming. I was fully awake and aware of everything around me. Looking back, I believe that what I experienced that night was the devil trying to scare me. I think it had something to do with the Rosary. The Rosary is a powerful prayer, one that the devil doesn't want us to use against him. Hi, my name's Brian, and I'm from Swords in Dublin. I've lived in my parents' house for the past 19 years, and over the years, a lot of strange things have happened. From lights flickering on and off to radios tuning themselves in, it was clear that something unusual was going on. Now that I'm 21, I've realized that most of these things seem to happen to me. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'd hear strange noises around the house, and I just got used to it. But one night, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I woke up in the middle of the night, but I couldn't move or speak. I hated it when that happened, but it was something I had experienced before. It had happened so many times that I was starting to get used to it. One night, I was lying on the floor of my room, sleeping on a mattress. I had just laid down new wooden floors, and there were bits of the old floor left in the corner of the room. I was just about to fall asleep when I heard the sound of loose wood moving across the floor, almost like it was being pushed around. When I opened my eyes, I saw a man, all dressed in black, standing over me, looking down at me. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I was absolutely terrified. I later found out that my mom's friend, who has a sort of sixth sense, has seen the same man before. She's also seen two women at different times. But that man, he really scares me. 3 weeks ago, I moved out of my parents' house to become more independent. I'm now renting a house with a friend, just a 5-minute walk from my parents. The first night was great, we had some drinks and settled in. But then, a day or two later, strange things started happening in the house. We tried to blame it on the neighbors, but I knew something was off. My friend didn't believe me when I told him about the things that had happened at my parents' place, and he always laughed it off. But after a few days, I found myself checking every room in the house, even the wardrobes, at least 5 times because I kept thinking there was someone hiding in the house. I kept hearing footsteps upstairs, banging sounds, and doors opening and closing. One Wednesday night, I was lying in bed, just about to fall asleep, when I heard the front door open and close. I opened my eyes, but I couldn't move. It felt like there was a ton of bricks pressing down on me. At first, I was terrified, but I managed to talk myself out of being scared. I couldn't move for about 5 minutes, and during that time, I could hear whispering, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. That's when it hit me, what if it was following me? I know it sounds crazy, but after everything that's happened, I couldn't help but wonder if the strange things I've experienced at my parents' house were now following me to my new place. Things have been happening all week, but last night was the worst. My girlfriend and I were lying on the bed, just talking, when we both heard what sounded like a man whistling. I didn't want to say anything at first, thinking maybe I was imagining it, but then my girlfriend looked at me, pale as a ghost, and told me she heard it too. We were both scared, and we almost decided to leave the house right then and there.
One early morning, I was slowly waking up but still a little sleepy. I noticed that my alarm clock didn't go off, which was unusual. Normally, I wake up to the sound of my alarm to get ready for work, but sometimes I wake up naturally and just lie there until the alarm rings. That morning, I decided to close my eyes and rest a bit longer. As I was lying there, I felt a presence on my bed, like someone was sitting beside me. In my mind's eye, I saw a little girl with blonde hair tied back in a ponytail. She was sitting on the floor next to my bed, her arms folded on the bed beside her, with her head resting on her arms. She was looking at me with a smile, almost like she was watching me with affection. Then, she spoke in that same voice I recognized from years ago. "I think, you really should get up now." I mumbled, still half asleep, "No, let me sleep." She responded with a cheeky smile, her tone playful yet confident, "No, I think you really should get up now." There was something in her voice that made me feel like she knew something was about to happen. At that moment, I wondered why I was having this conversation. Was it a dream? It felt like a warning of some sort. Still drowsy, I opened my eyes and quickly sat up to look around, but she was gone. I felt a bit unsettled but also oddly relieved. Then, just as I was trying to shake off the strange feeling, the alarm went off right at that very moment, almost as if on cue. I couldn't help but think about it for the rest of the morning. Was it just my imagination, or had she really woken me up just seconds before the alarm would have gone off? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. And when I looked at the side of my bed later, I noticed that the area near the edge was a bit lopsided, like something or someone had been resting there regularly. It was as if there was an impression left, as if someone had been sitting there for a long time. A couple of months later, in early spring, I had another strange experience. I woke up to the sound of someone in the bathroom turning the shower on. It wasn't unusual, so I just let myself drift back to sleep. But then, I had a dream. In the dream, I was an archaeologist, digging up old pieces of paper. As I went through them, I saw my name appear on one of the pages. Suddenly, I heard someone calling my name, over and over again. It felt like someone was trying to wake me up. Frustrated, I forced myself awake and looked around. No one was in my room, but I could still hear the sound of the shower running, the water hitting the floor. I thought it was strange that my mind had conjured up such a detailed dream, especially since this had happened to me twice before, when someone had physically woken me up. This time, though, no one was there. Just as I was about to lie back down, I heard a voice clearly say my name, Jack. It came from right beside my ear. My heart skipped a beat. I was terrified, but I also felt a wave of anger. Why was this happening? I called out one of the names of the people I lived with, but there was no response. I looked at the door of my bedroom, still hearing the sound of the shower, and it gave me some comfort. I figured they just didn't hear me. But as I lay back down, still wide awake, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling. The disembodied voice calling my name was so loud and clear, it made my blood run cold. I really don't want to experience something like that again. If there are any ways to stop it, I hope someone can offer advice. Honestly, I'd rather have the little girl waking me up again. Her voice was comforting, and her presence felt less threatening. The man's voice, on the other hand, was disturbing. I try to tell myself it's just an overactive imagination, but the truth is, I've had too many real experiences like this, both alone and with others, that didn't make sense. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.
My name is Brooke, and it's about my dad. He's a psychic medium, and when it comes to experiences like this, I trust him completely. He doesn't exaggerate or lie about things like this. The story involves my dad, who we'll call John for privacy reasons, and 3 other people, Linda, Janet, and Marie, again, not their real names. John has been the chairman of a theater committee for the past 4 years, and recently, they started a youth theater program. Linda is the principal, Janet is the support coach, and Marie is the dance choreographer. We've all known for a long time that our theater is haunted. In fact, every member of the committee has a ghost story. I have one myself. But this particular story, the one I'm about to tell you, is the most recent and by far the most unsettling. It all started one evening when John, Linda, Marie, and Janet were in the theater's bar, having a meeting about the youth theater. They were deep in conversation when suddenly, Linda and Janet heard a series of loud bangs coming from the auditorium. The thing is, no one else was in the building. Just the 4 of them. They looked at John and Marie and asked, "Did you guys hear that?" John and Marie were confused. "No, what was it?" Linda and Janet explained what they'd heard. Just as they were talking about it, the noise came again, only this time it was much louder, bang 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 bang. It went on like that for a solid 2 minutes. By then, everyone had heard it, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was hard not to feel uneasy. John said, "I know that sound. That's what the chairs sound like when they're being folded up really quickly, like someone's trying to pack them away in a hurry." He decided to check it out, to see if he could replicate the noise and figure out what was causing it. So, he walked over to the auditorium door. As soon as he opened it, a cold gust of air rushed out, so cold it felt unnatural. He described it as a deathly chill. And then, something happened. Something that still gives him chills to this day. A figure, or what seemed to be a figure, came charging toward him. John told me this man was unlike any human being he'd ever seen. The creature stood between 7 and 8 feet tall. It moved in a strange, jerky way, as if it had more than 2 legs but was trying to hide it. The thing was just a silhouette, dark and featureless. But what really terrified him wasn't just its appearance. As it got closer, it let out a terrible, distorted screech, a voice that wasn't quite human. It shouted, "Get them out!" John was paralyzed with fear. He slammed the door shut without a second thought. Now, as I mentioned, my dad is a psychic medium. He's been one for about 15 years, and he's never been scared of anything. But this? This was different. He told me later that he's never had such a strong feeling of danger. It was as if every part of him, his guides, his ancestors, even his animal guides, was screaming at him to leave. He ran back to the bar, called for Linda, Marie, and Janet, and told them, "We need to get out of here now. No questions. I'll explain outside." They locked up the theater and hurried to their cars. As John was getting in his car, he said he felt his gatekeeper's presence, but something was off. He said it felt like his gatekeeper was limping, like it was injured or weakened by whatever was inside the theater. His gatekeeper spoke to him, warning him, "This creature has been to your house. It's seen your children. When you get home, your oven will be on." The entire group stayed in touch on a group chat as they all drove home. They were all shaken up, trying to process what had happened. A few weeks ago, my dad had taken another medium on a tour of the theater. They were in the costume attic when the other medium told him, "John, I can't leave this attic. There are spirits of children here, and they're begging us to stay. They're terrified." At the time, my dad didn't know what to make of it. But after his encounter with this strange entity, he's come to believe that the children in the attic were being tormented by the same creature that was in the theater. This thing wasn't just scary, it was dangerous. It had been tormenting these innocent spirits. Now, none of us want to go back. We're all terrified. But we don't have much choice. The youth theater classes are starting up again in 2 weeks, and we have to go back. I moved to Suffolk about 9 years ago with my son. A couple of years before that, I met my husband. We both came from unhappy past relationships, so when we decided to move in together, it felt like we were really starting over. We now have a blended family, and our kids are 12, 16, and 18. We were on the hunt for a 4-bedroom house that would fit all of us. Both of us love older properties, and we found one that caught our eye. It wasn't perfect, the condition was enough to put most people off, but we fell in love with it instantly. Even now, 9 years later, we're still working on it. It had been on the market for a while, and we put in an offer. When it was accepted, we were over the moon. I remember the day the sale went through. My husband had already been there for a day or so, but I hadn't seen the house yet. It was a chilly November evening when I drove up. The lights were on inside, and through the window, I saw our kids running around. The house, which had once felt so empty, was now full of life. It might sound odd, but I had this strong feeling that the house was happy. Happy for us. Happy for the life we were bringing into it. That feeling hasn't changed, but lately, there have been some strange happenings. These events started only in the past year, and I can't help but feel curious about them. I'm wondering what others think, too. The house was supposedly built in 1805, and honestly, I was half expecting some sort of unexplained activity. I'm sensitive to these things, and my husband is too. But for the first 8 years, nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. Our village is steeped in local folklore, and I find it all fascinating. There's an old, derelict mill at the bottom of our garden, and a nearby lane is said to be haunted by a white witch. It gets pretty dark here at night, but strangely, I've never felt uneasy. If anything, it has a calm, almost comforting feel. I'll never forget one evening when I had a big argument with my husband. I stormed out, upset, and walked over to the old mill ruins. It was late, around 10 p.m., and the dark had settled in. I just needed some space. As I sat there alone in the ruins, I felt this overwhelming sense of comfort and calm. After about half an hour, I went back home, and my husband and I were able to sort things out calmly. Later, he suggested it might have been the white witch who had been guarding me and calming me down. It's a romantic idea, and while I'm not sure, I'm open to it. But that's not the point of this story. A year ago, I fell asleep on the sofa. My husband always nags me about it, especially since both of us have demanding jobs and we're constantly renovating the house. He worries I'm not getting proper rest. Anyway, I dozed off, and in the middle of my sleep, I felt a gentle nudge, just like the way my husband would wake me up. It was as if someone was trying to get my attention. At first, I didn't open my eyes. I was comfortable and just wanted to be left alone. But the nudge came again. Then again. Finally, I opened my eyes, and half awake, I mumbled, "Okay, I'll come up." But my husband wasn't there. I figured maybe he'd gone back upstairs, so I decided to follow him. But when I stood up, I noticed something strange. The lounge door was closed, and there was no light coming from under it. And more strangely, I didn't hear the creaky sound of the stairs that always announces someone's movements. My stomach dropped. I went upstairs to check on my husband, and he was fast asleep. I checked the kids' rooms, hoping one of them had been the one to wake me. But no, they were all asleep too. I climbed into bed, still a little shaken, and wrapped myself in the duvet, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. Eventually, sleep came. But the next morning, I told my husband about it. He's open to paranormal things, but he seemed to think it was just a dream or a half-dream. I convinced myself it was too, but the feeling still lingers. It's one of those things I keep thinking about, and honestly, I'm a little more uneasy about it now than I was then. A few weeks later, the knocking started. At first, it was rare, and only I heard it. It would always happen between 3 and 3:30 a.m., and every time, I would wake up and hear the same gentle knocking, 2 light knocks on our bedroom door. It wasn't aggressive, just a soft, polite knock, like someone asking to come in. It would happen at exactly the same time every night, right beside me. I would jump up, turn on the light, and open the door, but there was never anyone there. I kept telling my husband about it, but he didn't believe me at first. That is, until he started hearing it too. The knocking became more frequent, and he also started hearing footsteps on the stairs more often than I ever did. In fact, it's been happening almost every night now. Last night, he said he was woken up every hour by either the knocking or the footsteps. I could tell he was really exhausted today, and I feel bad for him. As for me, the activity has started happening during the day too. The other evening, I was alone in the house, taking a bath. I had my headphones in, but I thought I heard the knocks on the bathroom door. I turned off my music to listen more closely, but I didn't hear it again. What I did feel, though, was a sudden rush of cold air. The bathroom, which had been steamy, turned noticeably colder. It felt strange and uncomfortable. I was on the verge of calling my husband to come home, but I didn't want to sound ridiculous. I knew he was due back in half an hour. I waited it out, and when he came home, I told him about it. He admitted he had felt the cold sensation too, which made me feel a little better. It's been happening more often now, and the energy in the house seems to be shifting. There's still no malice in these occurrences, but it feels like something is building. Right now, as I'm typing this, I'm feeling that cold air again. It's about 9 a.m., and I have a full house. My husband is in the bath, the kids are upstairs, and yet I feel this chill in the air. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This happened in Drumore, Scotland, on the B7065, on New Year's Eve, 2014. Four of us and my best mate, our now ex-girlfriends, and myself, decided to stay in a cottage for New Year. As you can imagine, we got pretty drunk and a bit high, and at one point, I made the mistake of taking codeine instead of paracetamol. This combination knocked me out a bit, and I started feeling really sleepy. I tried to fight it off, so I got up, grabbed another beer, and walked around a bit to try and wake myself up before midnight. By the time it was around 11 p.m., I was starting to feel a little better. After another hour of music and beers, midnight finally arrived. We all decided to go for a walk down the road, B7065. I was still a bit tipsy and, with the dark, spooky road ahead of us and not much around, I thought it would be fun to run ahead, hide, and jump out on the others. So, I took off, looking for a bush to hide in. What happened next is still a bit foggy for me, thanks to the mix of codeine, alcohol, and weed, but there's one moment that stands out very clearly. For what felt like 10 seconds, it was as if my body and mind suddenly sobered up completely. That's when I saw it. I was standing still on the road, though I don't really remember stopping. Then, out of nowhere, I saw a horse-drawn carriage, a really old-fashioned one, with 2 black horses. Walking in front of the horses was a woman, dressed in a classic Victorian white dress with a big hat. She might have been holding flowers, but I can't be sure. As she walked by, she looked at me, smiled, and waved. I remember feeling completely stunned, like time had slowed down, and I waved back without thinking. I tried to say something, but no words came out. I was completely fixated on her, watching her closely as she came within about 2 to 3 meters of me. I didn't pay attention to the carriage driver, though I do have a faint memory of something like a black shape hunched over, maybe the driver, but my eyes were glued to the woman. She was very clear, almost glowing, but not in a blinding way, just a soft, friendly glow. She gave off such a calm and pleasant energy. Then, as quickly as it happened, my friends caught up to me. I don't remember them passing me, but they arrived and asked what I was doing. I asked my mate, Gary, "Did you see that woman in the carriage go past?" But by then, the whole thing had disappeared, as if it had never been there. We all headed back home after that, and honestly, I'd completely forgotten about hiding in the bush because, well, I had just seen a ghost. To conclude our long-awaited journey through Western Europe, my brother and I arrived in London on Good Friday in 2012. Originally, we had hoped to visit Westminster Abbey, but our plans were thwarted when we learned it was closed to the public for the holiday. Instead, we decided to take a walk through Piccadilly Circus, where we were approached by a local vendor offering discounted tickets to see the Tower of London. With the Summer Olympics just months away and the streets becoming increasingly crowded, we eagerly accepted the offer, glad to escape the bustle. The moment we passed through the Bywood Archway and into the Tower grounds, it felt as though we were stepping back in time, crossing from the modern world into an era long past. We decided to explore the grounds on our own, taking our time to read the signs and learn about the fascinating history of the place. The Tower of London reminded us of the historic forts we had visited back home in Ontario, old stone structures that, at first glance, seemed simple enough. However, with a little research, it became clear that this particular medieval site held far more significance than met the eye. I distinctly remember passing by a tour group near a display of medieval torture instruments. The yeoman warder guiding the group was describing, in graphic detail, the horrific uses these devices had been put to over the centuries. The vividness of his descriptions added a chilling layer to the atmosphere of the place. Our personal tour eventually led us to the chapel of St. Peter at Vincula. As we approached the entrance, I casually glanced inside and was immediately struck by the sound of footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth down the aisle toward the altar, then back again. The sound continued for about 30 seconds before suddenly stopping. I stood frozen at the entrance, still hearing the faint echo of the footsteps in my mind, unsure of what I had just witnessed. After a moment of silence, we left the chapel and finished our tour with a visit to the jewel house to see the legendary crown jewels. Even so, my thoughts kept returning to that chapel. Nearly 10 years have passed since that day, and I still find myself thinking about the mysterious footsteps. The most intriguing part of the experience, however, is that I may never know who the restless spirit was that caused the sound, or if it was perhaps a lingering echo of the past. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. This happened back in 2017. I was attending a training course that lasted a week and a half. The first week was completely fine. I stayed in the same room the whole time, and I had no issues, no strange vibes. But after heading home for the weekend and returning for the second part of the course, I was given a different room. I think it was either 152 or 158. As soon as I opened the door, I noticed a weird smell. It wasn't anything too unusual, just a damp, musty scent, which I didn't think too much about at the time. I unpacked, sat on the bed, and immediately felt a sense of unease, like a low-level anxiety. But I brushed it off, thinking it was just nerves about the course and being away from home again. After the day's training, I headed back to my room to shower and change. The discomfort in the room only seemed to grow. It wasn't anything I could pin down, but I just didn't feel right being there. I met up with a friend in the bar, had a drink or two, not enough to be drunk, but enough to feel a bit more relaxed. Still, when I returned to the room later that night, it didn't feel any better. I turned on the TV, lay back on the bed, but couldn't concentrate. I kept glancing toward the corner of the room, though, when I looked, there was nothing there. Eventually, I turned off the TV and tried to sleep. It was a hot summer night, and I'm not sure what time it was when I woke up, but I woke up suddenly, on my side, with my back to the window. The very same corner I had been staring at earlier seemed even darker now. My body was drenched in sweat, and I felt my heart racing. I couldn't breathe properly, like I was having a panic attack, even though I had never experienced anything like that before. For some strange reason, I felt compelled to look toward that corner again. The room was nearly dark, save for a small amount of light from the window. But the corner, it looked darker than before. That's when it happened. I suddenly found myself whispering, over and over, "I don't want to talk, I don't want to talk." My breathing was all over the place, and I couldn't stop myself. It felt almost like I wasn't in control. I told myself I was probably just sick, maybe food poisoning or something, and tried to calm down. After what felt like forever, I finally fell back asleep. But the next time I woke up, it wasn't much better. I found myself again on my side, with my back to the window. I rolled onto my stomach, and when I turned my head to the left, something caught my eye. The light coming through the window was interrupted by a shadow. And that shadow, it was moving. I looked up, and there it was. A figure, black, shapeless, but somehow it had arms. The arms were moving erratically in my direction. I heard a scream, but it took me a moment to realize the scream was mine. I was frozen in terror, even though I've never been the type to scare easily. I was utterly terrified, so much so that I pulled the sheets over my head, curled up like a child, and just stayed there, paralyzed. It felt like hours, maybe even longer. But slowly, the first light of dawn crept into the room. Hesitant, I peeked out from under the sheets. The room was calm now, normal, even. I took a deep breath, then bolted for the door, flung it open, and ran to the reception in my boxer shorts. When the staff showed up in the morning, I told them I needed a new room. They seemed confused at first. After all, I was basically in my underwear, but when I told them it wasn't the room itself, but something in the room, they just nodded. To my surprise, they said, "We know exactly what you're talking about." They gave me a new room right away, but I had to go back to my old room to get my things. The moment I stepped back in, the air felt different. There was a heaviness, like a thick fog of dread pressing down on me. It felt overwhelming, like it was coming from the room itself, or maybe from something in the room. I quickly grabbed my clothes, but the feeling lingered. It was like the room was waiting for me to talk to it, or at least acknowledge it. The new room was fine, but the unease stayed with me. Even in my dreams, that sense of something being off never quite left. And honestly, it took a good year for things to feel normal again. When I was younger, I was always intrigued by the supernatural, and, looking back, it almost seemed like I attracted these things. Let's just say, I dabbled a little. I no longer dabble. This, however, was my very first encounter. You may or may not believe this story, and honestly, that doesn't matter to me. What matters is that, after all these years, I finally get to tell it. The room was a small, modest bedsit in the basement of a large house on King Street in Brighton, Sussex, England. For a young couple with a small child, it seemed like a lucky find. So, they paid the rent in cash and moved in right away, thinking it would be a temporary place until they could find something more suitable. I was that small child. The first morning, when the heavy curtains were drawn back to let in the sunlight, I stood on the window seat and gazed out at the busy street. There were workmen resurfacing the road, and the air smelled like tarmac. A steamroller rolled by, and I was absolutely fascinated. I waved frantically at the driver, and to my delight, he saw me and waved back. I hadn't even had breakfast or gotten dressed, and yet I had this moment of joy. What a way to start the day. This place seemed like it was going to be great. Even now, the smell of hot tarmac still brings back that feeling of excitement. But then, the strange dreams began that very night. The room had an old gas cooker, the kind with 2 smaller burners at the back and 1 large burner at the front. It had a grill and a separate oven with a pull-down door. It sat directly opposite the foot of my bed, and it seemed to dominate the room. That night, I woke suddenly, feeling an eerie chill. The room smelled damp and musty, even more so than it had before. In the dark, I could make out the form of the cooker at the end of my bed. It was hard to see much of the room, but the cooker stood out, almost as if it had a presence of its own. It wasn't glowing, but it felt ominous, like something was there, something not quite right. I watched as the cooker seemed to breathe. The sides of it subtly expanded and contracted, like something was pushing from inside, trying to break free. I wanted to wake up, but I couldn't. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the dream. And then, the mist started. At first, it was barely noticeable, thin tendrils of smoke or fog rising from the gas rings. The wisps hovered just above the cooker, slowly swirling, until they began to take shape. 2 smaller, childlike figures emerged from the back burners. Their faces were vague, like something you might see in the wood grain of furniture if you stared at it long enough. They seemed to be hiding, as if playing peekaboo, their faces barely visible but always just out of sight. The larger shape from the front burner was different. It was darker, more defined. As the mist rose higher, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I wanted to close my eyes, to wake up, but I couldn't. My only response, in my 4-year-old fear, was to bury myself under the blankets and shut my eyes tight. Somehow, I fell asleep. The next morning, everything seemed normal. The cooker was still there, just an old, nondescript piece of furniture. The workmen were still outside, resurfacing the road. The steamroller driver didn't wave this time, but they smiled and waved at me from across the street. But that night, the dream came back.
This time, the figures were clearer. The 2 smaller ones, though still childlike, had faces, and their eyes and mouths were black voids. Despite their eerie appearance, they didn't seem threatening. They seemed almost familiar, like kindred spirits who, like me, couldn't leave their place. The larger figure was different. She, because I instinctively knew it was a she, was darker, more sinister. She rose from the cooker, flanked by the 2 smaller figures, and grew taller, until she reached the ceiling. Her presence filled the room. A cold dread settled over me as she seemed to drift, moving closer and closer to my bed. I could feel her approach before I even saw her. The temperature in the room dropped, and that familiar musty smell filled the air. She would stand at the side of my bed, always on the left, just staring. I never had the courage to look directly at her, but I could make out her features, thin, with a pointed chin and dark, hollow eyes. Her mouth was a thin, disapproving line, which occasionally opened to reveal an abyss of blackness. She wore a long, black pleated crinoline dress, its edges frayed, showing the worn gray fabric beneath. There was something strange about it, almost like it glowed faintly in the dark, the way a crow's feathers might shimmer in moonlight. Even now, as I recall it, I can still smell the dank, musty scent of the dress. It was like an autumn graveyard. I hated that feeling. The coldness of her presence seeped into the blankets, chilling me to the bone. Sometimes, I would resist the urge to fall asleep. I would stare at her from under the covers, trying to keep my eyes open, hoping that she would go away. Eventually, as if she were part of the morning mist, she would fade, disappearing as the gray light of dawn filtered through the window. But not always. Sometimes, she would catch me by surprise, materializing from the darkest corner of the room and rushing towards me, as though she were trying to catch me off guard. Her presence terrified me. One day, my mother had to step out for a moment. She left me in the room with strict instructions to stay put. And then, she appeared. I didn't notice her enter, but somehow I couldn't look directly at her. She spoke softly, suggesting that I play a game. She told me to gather a towel and a cushion, to lay the cushion on the oven door, drape the towel over the grill handle, and then turn on the gas. I was told to kneel and lay my head on the pillow, with the towel draped over me. I knew it was wrong to turn on the gas, but I was just a child, and an adult was telling me what to do. So, I did as she asked. As I lay there, feeling calm and sleepy, the smell of gas grew stronger, overwhelming my senses. But the voice reassured me it would only be for a moment, and then everything would be better. I felt strangely peaceful, as though I was just going to drift off to sleep. The sound of a key in the door snapped me out of my trance. In a panic, I quickly turned off the gas and jumped up, trying to act normal. My mother opened the window to air the room and asked if I had been messing with the cooker. The smell of gas was still thick in the air, but I acted as if nothing had happened. Soon after that, we moved out of that basement room. My parents found a flat in Hove, and we left the strange cooker behind. The nightmares stopped the moment we left. I never spoke of them again, but sometimes I wonder.
I live on one of the most northern islands of the United Kingdom, which also happens to be one of the most remote islands off Scotland. In fact, we're closer to Norway than we are to the Scottish mainland. I'm sharing this because the events I'm about to tell you took place here, in our new home, which we bought from the estate of an elderly woman. Her heirs didn't want the house, and honestly, I can understand why. It needed a lot of work. In fact, we're still not fully done with the renovations, though we're close, mostly just some decorating left and getting rid of the dangerous polystyrene tiles from a couple of the ceilings. But let me start from the beginning. When we first came to look at the house, it felt empty compared to our previous home, which seemed to always have spirits or ghosts, or whatever you like to call them, passing through. We weren't sure we wanted to take on all the work the house needed, but we did like the area. The nearest neighbors are about 1/4 of a mile away, and the house offers sea views on one side and lovely country views on the other. Plus, we have a huge garden with trees on 2 sides. Trees are rare around here, and it's said that the Vikings used them all up to build their ships. On a second visit, we brought our dog along. She had a fantastic time running around the garden like she was on a big adventure. But when we tried to get her to come into the house, she hesitated. She'd step inside the front door, but only gingerly, like she was afraid something was waiting to eat her. Eventually, after a lot of coaxing and some treats, she came inside, had a look around the rooms, and decided everything was fine. But when we got to the kitchen, she absolutely refused to come in. No amount of treats or coaxing could get her past the threshold. She would only go a foot or 2 into the room before darting back out again, and not even turning around. This was all important, but we decided to buy the house anyway. Over time, both the dog and our cats got used to living here, though none of them ever seemed to like the kitchen. The first thing we did after moving in was rip out all the wood in the kitchen because it was damp and full of woodworm. The animals still avoided the room. This is when things started to get interesting. While I was checking on the progress of the kitchen renovation one day, I peeked in and saw an elderly woman standing in the middle of the floor. She was just standing there, as if looking around to see what was happening. When she saw me, she turned slowly and gave me the warmest, most comforting smile. At first, I didn't think much of it. But over the next 18 to 20 months, she became a regular presence. It was clear she was interested in the work we were doing, especially the new kitchen. Every time we made progress, installing insulation, laying down new floorboards, or putting in new kitchen units, she'd appear, usually when we took a break or finished for the day. She always seemed to be admiring the changes, especially the new kitchen. She never scared us. In fact, she seemed quite content to watch over the work we were doing, as though she was very much approving of it. It was as though she was making sure we were doing everything the right way. At first, we had no idea who she was, but after asking around the village, I learned that she was indeed the former owner of the house. She had been a lovely woman, deeply attached to the house and garden. She had become frail in her later years and had to move into a care home for the final years of her life. Apparently, she loved feeding the birds, and since we started doing the same, she's been seen in the garden by us and even by the children of our nearest neighbors, who knew her well. What's even stranger is that our dog and our cat now act as if they're communicating with her when she's around. They're no longer afraid of the kitchen, and they seem quite comfortable with her presence. As we've done more and more work on the house, especially now that it's almost finished, we've started to see less and less of her. I think she's been watching over us in the house, ensuring that we've respected her beloved home. But now, as we near the end of the renovations, I suspect she might feel ready to move on, perhaps to be with her late husband or parents, wherever she's been longing to be. It's an odd feeling, knowing that she's been here for so long, watching over us and making sure everything is just right. But at the same time, I hope that when the house and garden are fully restored, she'll feel that it's time for her to leave. In 2014, I lost my granddad in October. It was a hard blow, especially since my grandma had passed a few years earlier, on Christmas Eve 2010. Since then, little things had happened, things that didn't make sense at the time but now, looking back, feel like signs they were still around. I started noticing strange smells in the house. Sometimes I'd walk in and catch the strong scent of stew cooking, even though no one was cooking. That smell was a signature of my grandma, who used to make stew every Wednesday when I visited her after school. Other times, I'd smell pipe tobacco, just like my granddad used to smoke. There were even times when I thought I caught a glimpse of my grandma's skirt drifting by, but I dismissed it as my imagination. Nothing was too alarming. It was all small things, but they added up. And then one night, I had a dream, or rather, it wasn't a dream at all. I was standing in the living room of my grandparents' house, and there they were, both of them, standing in the doorway facing me. My grandma did all the talking, just like she always did in life. My granddad stood beside her, nodding and agreeing, just as he did when they were both alive. She told me, "We're so proud of you," and that was it. There was no more conversation, no more words. It was brief, but the impact it left on me was immense. What makes this so special, and what sets it apart from a regular dream, was the way they looked. They were dressed in the exact clothing they had worn at their funerals. My grandma in her navy dress, and my granddad in his dark suit, just as I remembered from that day. It felt real, like they were there, standing in front of me. A visit, not just a dream. I could feel their presence, hear their voices, and experience the love they wanted me to know. I'm certain it was a spiritual visit, a moment where they crossed over to show me they were still watching over me, still proud, still with me in some way. It was short, but it's a memory that stays with me every day. The second experience happened on a normal afternoon. I had gone upstairs to take a nap while the kids were at school. It was quiet, peaceful, just the kind of moment to rest. I remember falling asleep in my bed, knowing exactly where I was. But when I woke up, things took a bizarre turn. I found myself downstairs on the living room sofa. I was completely awake, or at least I thought I was. It was so vivid, I could feel the texture of the couch, hear the hum of the house, and I knew I had gotten up and walked downstairs. But there was one problem: I had never gotten up. I hadn't sleepwalked. I was absolutely certain I had been in my bed, so how was I now downstairs? I tried to get up and go back upstairs, but the strangest thing happened. It felt like I was walking through thick water, moving against a strong current. My legs felt heavy, slow. No matter how hard I tried, I could only move a few inches at a time, struggling against this unseen force. I couldn't even remember how I'd gotten as far as I did. My thoughts were jumbled, and everything felt off. Then, in a blink, I found myself awake again, for real this time, back in my bed upstairs. I was exactly where I should have been. There was no mistaking it. I had not gotten out of bed, and yet the experience downstairs had felt so real. I have no explanation for it, except that maybe it was a spontaneous, unplanned astral projection. A moment where my consciousness drifted from my body, and I had no control over it. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way.